My husband invited his ex-wife over for dinner, humiliated me, and compared me to a cheap casserole right in front of her. I watched him pour a $500 bottle of wine and treat me like I did not even exist. That night, I packed a suitcase, took my son, and disappeared into the cold Chicago air. He did not even notice we were gone until he tried to buy her breakfast the next morning, and his credit card was declined. My name is Hannah. I am 33 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant, specializing in uncovering corporate fraud. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to quietly gather your strength before taking down someone who underestimated your worth. The dining room of our Chicago suburb home felt suffocatingly warm that Friday evening. I stood near the edge of the mahogany table, holding an empty serving tray, while my husband Derek held court. Derek was 36, a sales executive, constantly chasing the next big venture capital payout for his media consulting startup. He thrived on projecting an image of limitless wealth and success. Sitting across from him, basking in his undivided attention, was his ex-wife Vanessa. Vanessa was 34 and wore a silk slip dress that looked entirely inappropriate for a casual family dinner. She constantly flipped her perfectly styled hair and made sure the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist caught the light from the chandelier. Derek had insisted we invite her over because they still shared what he called a vital professional network. I knew it was just an excuse for him to show off. Derek uncorked a bottle of vintage Cabernet one that cost at least $500 and poured a generous amount into Vanessa's crystal glass. He did not even glance my way. "Hannah bakes a decent casserole," Derek said with a loud, booming laugh that echoed off the dining room walls. "But when it comes to Michelin-level taste, Vanessa is the queen. You are still glowing like a limitless black card V." Vanessa offered a slow, satisfied smirk, bringing the wine glass to her lips. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on the simple gray apron I wore over my clothes. "It is so quaint how domestic you are, Hannah," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Is that apron vintage? It looks like something someone would wear to scrub the floors. I suppose not everyone is built to handle the high life." Derek chuckled in agreement, completely unfazed by the blatant insult directed at his wife. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers in the air, pointing at the empty plates on the table. "Clear these away, Hannah," he ordered casually, not even looking at me. "Bring out the dessert. V and I have some business strategies to discuss." Any normal wife might have cried. Any normal wife might have thrown the serving tray across the room, screamed at the disrespect, or demanded that the ex-wife leave the house immediately. But I am not a normal wife. I am a forensic accountant. In my line of work, I do not react to emotional provocations. I look for discrepancies. I look for the hidden truth beneath the shiny surface. I looked at Derek, noting the brand new designer watch on his wrist. I looked at Vanessa, observing the fresh designer clothes and the smug entitlement radiating from her. I knew the exact numbers of Derek's startup. They were pre-revenue. They were bleeding cash while desperately trying to close a $5 million seed round from local investors. The math of this luxurious lifestyle did not add up. I complied with his order, showing zero emotion. I stacked their dirty plates onto my tray, my face a mask of absolute calm. I did not see a cheating husband and a gloating ex-wife. I saw a fraudulent spreadsheet. I saw a walking, breathing financial crime that was begging to be audited. I turned my back on their laughter and walked into the quiet sanctuary of the kitchen. I set the heavy tray down on the marble counter, took a deep breath, and washed my hands. The sound of running water drowned out the obnoxious giggling coming from the dining room. I dried my hands carefully, then reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. A nagging suspicion had been growing in the back of my mind all evening. Derek had been excessively secretive about his secondary credit card, a card that was tied directly to my primary line of credit, which I had built over a decade of flawless financial management. I opened my secure banking application, navigated past the primary checking account, and pulled up the recent transactions for the secondary card. The screen loaded and the numbers materialized in stark black and white. There it was. A pending transaction processed just 2 days ago at the Hermes boutique on Oak Street. The total was $15,000. I slowly raised my head and looked through the narrow gap of the kitchen door. My eyes bypassed Derek and Vanessa, landing squarely on the armchair in the corner of the living room. Resting on the plush fabric was a brand new, pristine designer handbag that Vanessa had proudly paraded into my home an hour earlier. The pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. He was not just disrespecting me in my own dining room. He was using my hard-earned credit, the financial stability I had built through years of grueling corporate audits, to fund his ex-wife's luxury lifestyle. He was siphoning my security to impress a woman who thought I was nothing more than the help. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. My heart rate did not spike. My hands did not shake. The humiliation that Derek and Vanessa thought they were inflicting on me was completely overshadowed by the cold, calculating realization of what I had to do next. The dinner party was just a distraction. The real work was about to begin. I left the dessert plates resting on the cold marble of the kitchen island. The lemon tart I had baked entirely from scratch could sit there and spoil for all I cared. Walking silently past the grand archway of the dining room, I kept my footsteps light on the polished hardwood floor. Derek and Vanessa had migrated to the plush couches in the living room, their voices carrying easily up the winding staircase. They were laughing now, reminiscing about a luxury vacation they took to Cabo years ago, completely ignoring the fact that the wife who paid the mortgage was still inside the house. I did not shed a single tear as I climbed the stairs. Crying is a biological response to sudden loss, but I was not losing anything of value tonight. I was simply cutting a toxic high-risk asset from my life portfolio. I entered the master bedroom and locked the heavy oak door with a quiet, decisive click. Walking straight to my walk-in closet, I pushed aside the rows of tailored power suits I wore when tearing apart corrupt corporate entities. Hidden in the very back, concealed behind a row of winter coats, was a sleek black suitcase. It was already packed. I had prepared this bag 3 days ago. My professional instincts had been screaming at me for weeks. The missing mail, the sudden erratic changes in Derek's schedule, the defensive outbursts whenever I casually asked about his startup company's cash burn rate. I had prepared the bag just in case my suspicions were ever validated. Tonight, the $15,000 handbag sitting proudly in my living room was the final receipt I needed. Before I grabbed my laptop from the mahogany study desk, a sudden shift in the conversation downstairs caught my attention. The house was quiet enough that their voices drifted perfectly through the floorboards traveling up the ventilation shafts. "You have to fix this," Derek Vanessa was saying. The playful, arrogant teasing was entirely gone from her voice, replaced by a sharp, desperate edge of panic. "They are not going to wait forever, and I am out of options." "Relax, Five." Derek replied, his tone dripping with that unearned salesman confidence he always used to mask his incompetence. "I told you the $5 million seed round closes next week. The investors are completely hooked. Once the ink dries on that contract, I will take care of your little problem. Just keep playing along and trust me." My blood ran ice cold, but my mind sharpened with absolute clarity. A little problem that required a chunk of a $5 million venture capital investment was not a minor debt. It was a financial catastrophe. I opened my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced precision. Derek was a smooth talker who could charm a room full of naive angel investors, but his digital security was an absolute joke. He used the same predictable password for his home office network as he did for his sports streaming services. I easily bypassed his basic firewall and logged directly into his startup's cloud storage drive. As a forensic accountant, I did not need days to spot financial anomalies. I just needed access to the general ledger and the unfiltered transaction histories. I initiated a bulk download, copying the entire directory to a highly secure encrypted flash drive I always carried. While the green progress bar ticked across the screen, I opened the current fiscal year expense reports. It was a bloodbath of corporate financial misconduct. Derek had been classifying luxury dinners, five-star hotel stays, and personal designer shopping sprees as client acquisition costs. But that was minor fraud compared to the wire transfers. I spotted a recurring massive vendor payment to a media consulting firm based out of Nevada. A quick public record search confirmed my darkest suspicion. The firm did not exist. It was a hastily assembled shell company, and the registered agent was listed under a clever variation of Vanessa's maiden name. Derek was bleeding his own startup company dry using investor funds and my flawless credit line to bail his ex-wife out of some massive hidden debt. I watched the progress bar inch forward, 50%, 60%. Downstairs, I heard the sharp clinking of crystal wine glasses, a toast. They were toasting to their brilliant scheme, celebrating a victory they had not yet won. I dug deeper, cross-referencing the shell company's routing numbers with the joint bank accounts Derek and I shared for household expenses. The sheer audacity of his setup was breathtaking. He had linked my primary checking account as a fallback for the shell company's overdrafts. If his venture capital deal fell through next week, the creditors would come directly for my assets. The house I bought, the savings I earned, the future I built for my son. Derek was willing to sacrifice all of it to risk my absolute ruin, just to play the wealthy hero for a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a walking ATM machine. The download completed with a soft chime. I pulled the flash drive from the port and slipped it securely into the hidden inner pocket of my jacket. I shut down the laptop, wiped my digital footprints, and left the machine exactly as I had found it. Derek would never know his digital vault had been raided until it was far too late. He thought he was playing a high-stakes game of corporate chess, but he was just a desperate gambler doubling down with stolen chips. I grabbed my suitcase, the wheels gliding silently over the carpet, and walked softly down the hall to the room painted in a calming shade of pale yellow. I turned the handle slowly and stepped inside. A small nightlight cast a warm, comforting glow over the bed where my 6-year-old son Leo was sleeping peacefully. He was clutching his favorite plush dinosaur, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. He looked so innocent, so entirely removed from the toxic criminal web his father had spun downstairs. I set the suitcase near the door, walked over and sat gently on the edge of his bed. I reached out and rubbed his shoulder, projecting nothing but absolute safety and calm. "Leo," I whispered, keeping my voice steady and soothing in the quiet room. "Wake up, sweetie." He stirred, rubbing his eyes with small fists, and looked up at me with sleepy confusion. "Mommy, is it morning yet?" "Not yet," I smiled, brushing the soft hair away from his forehead. "Put your coat on, buddy. We are going on a secret midnight adventure." My husband invited his ex-wife over for dinner, humiliated me, and compared me to a cheap casserole right in front of her. I watched him pour a $500 bottle of wine and treat me like I did not even exist. That night, I packed a suitcase, took my son, and disappeared into the cold Chicago air. He did not even notice we were gone until he tried to buy her breakfast the next morning, and his credit card was declined. My name is Hannah. I am 33 years old and I work as a forensic accountant specializing in uncovering corporate fraud. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to quietly gather your strength before taking down someone who underestimated your worth. Leo did not complain or ask questions. He simply hugged his stuffed dinosaur tighter to his chest and slipped his arms into the heavy winter coat I held out for him. I zipped it up to his chin, pressing a quick kiss to his forehead. He was used to trusting me completely, a silent pact we had built over the years, while his father was always too busy playing the charismatic entrepreneur. I grabbed my sleek black suitcase with one hand and took Leo's small warm hand in the other. We bypassed the main staircase entirely, taking the narrow back stairs that led down through the mudroom. Above us, the muffled sounds of Derek and Vanessa's laughter still vibrated through the floorboards. They were probably opening a second bottle of that $500 Cabernet by now, toasting to a future funded entirely by my credit score. The sheer arrogance of it almost made me smile. They thought they were the architects of a brilliant scam, but they were just two amateurs dancing on a trapdoor I had already wired to drop. I eased the back door open, wincing slightly, as the cold Chicago night air rushed in to meet us. The temperature had plummeted below freezing, turning the damp concrete of the driveway into a slick, icy surface. I carried Leo the last few feet to my SUV, not wanting his boots to crunch loudly against the frozen gravel. I buckled him into his car seat with practiced efficiency, tucking a thick fleece blanket around his legs. Within seconds, his eyes were heavy again, the hum of the insulated vehicle lulling him back to sleep. He was safe. He was out of the blast zone. Now it was time to detonate the charges. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors. I did not turn on the engine yet. Instead, I pulled my encrypted tablet from my tote bag and rested it against the steering wheel. The blue light from the screen illuminated the dark cabin of the SUV, casting sharp shadows across the dashboard. As a forensic accountant, I spent my days dismantling the financial structures of corrupt executives. Tonight, I was applying those exact same corporate demolition tactics to my own marriage. I opened my primary banking application. The dashboard loaded, displaying the joint checking and savings accounts Derek relied on to fund his daily charade. I bypassed the standard transfer options and navigated directly to the Security and Fraud Prevention Center. With a few swift, deliberate keystrokes, I initiated a total lockdown. I flagged the accounts for suspicious corporate activity, a move that immediately froze all outgoing transfers, ATM withdrawals, and debit card purchases. The bank's automated system generated a pop-up window warning me that lifting this freeze would require an in-person visit and a sworn affidavit. I tapped confirm without a second of hesitation. Next, I moved to the credit lines. Derek's secondary card, the one he had proudly swiped to purchase Vanessa's $15,000 Hermes bag, was tied to my primary Social Security number. I did not just pause the card. I reported it as compromised due to identity theft and unauthorized high-yield spending. The digital lock engaged instantly with a satisfying green checkmark on my screen. Any future attempts to use that card would not just result in a standard decline. It would trigger a fraud alert straight to the merchant's terminal. Derek was officially financially paralyzed. He had exactly $0 to his name, zero access to my credit, and absolutely no way to funnel money into Vanessa's illegal shell company. I transferred my personal premarital assets into an isolated single-signature account that Derek did not even know existed. I watched the balances shift, the numbers dropping to zero on his end and securing my future on mine. The precision of it felt incredibly vindicating. There was no screaming match, no throwing of clothes onto the front lawn, no begging for him to explain his betrayal. True power in the modern world does not reside in emotional outbursts. It resides in the control of capital. As I finalized the last security protocol, the dark screen of my smartphone mounted on the dashboard suddenly lit up. The harsh glare of a new text message pierced the quiet of the car. It was from Derek. "Bring out more wine." The message read, the entitlement practically dripping from the digital text. "And make sure the glasses are polished. V hates smudges." I stared at the glowing words for a long moment. He was sitting in the living room I had decorated, drinking wine I had purchased, demanding service from the wife he was actively trying to bankrupt. He thought I was still in the kitchen, dutifully wiping down crystal glasses like a submissive, clueless servant. The absolute delusion of the man was staggering. I picked up my phone, but I did not reply immediately. I opened my car door and stepped back out into the freezing Chicago air. The wind whipped my hair across my face, but I did not feel the cold. I walked slowly around the back of the SUV, my boots stepping silently on the ice, until I reached the edge of the driveway. Just beyond the curb was a heavy iron storm drain, the dark metal slick with winter frost. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my heavy ring of house keys. The brass caught the faint light from the street lamp overhead. These keys represented a life that was completely fabricated. They unlocked a house built on my hard work, but infested with his lies. I held the keychain over the dark, narrow grate of the storm drain. I opened my fingers. The keys dropped into the black void, echoing with a sharp metallic clink as they hit the icy water far below. It was the sound of a contract being permanently severed. I turned my back on the sprawling suburban house and walked back to the driver's seat. I closed the door, shutting out the biting wind, and finally pressed the ignition button. The engine roared to life, a low, powerful hum that signaled my departure. I picked up my phone one last time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I did not type out a paragraph of anger. I did not demand answers. I gave him exactly the response his arrogance deserved. Enjoy the wine. I typed my face a mask of absolute icy resolve. It is the last thing I am paying for. I hit send, shifted the SUV into drive, and pulled out of the driveway. I did not look back in the rearview mirror. The house, the husband, and the ex-wife faded into the darkness behind me as I drove toward the highway, leaving the wreckage of my marriage exactly where it belonged. I did not need to be physically present in our suburban house to know exactly how Derek's morning unfolded. As a forensic accountant, I am trained to construct a perfect narrative from digital breadcrumbs. Sitting safely in the guest room of my brother Connor's house with Leo, happily eating pancakes in the kitchen, I opened my laptop and watched my husband's financial execution broadcast in real time across my security dashboard. At 9 in the morning, the system registered a red receipt on the final text message I had sent him. I could picture him perfectly. Derek waking up with a heavy wine-induced hangover, reaching for his phone on the nightstand. He probably read my message about the wine being the last thing I was paying for, rolled his eyes, and tossed the phone aside. In his arrogant mind, I was just a hysterical wife throwing a predictable tantrum. He undoubtedly assumed I had packed a small overnight bag, taken our son, and fled to a hotel to wait for his inevitable half-hearted apology. He had no idea I had stripped the copper wiring from the walls of his financial life. Instead of calling me to check on his child, the digital logs showed Derek attempting to access his ride-sharing application at 10:15. He was taking Vanessa out for breakfast, not just a quick coffee either. The GPS pinged an attempt to route a luxury black car service to La Maison Royale, an ultra-exclusive, ridiculously overpriced French bistro in downtown Chicago. It was the exact kind of pretentious establishment Derek loved to frequent when he wanted to project the illusion of staggering wealth. I watched the screen with cold satisfaction as the ride-sharing app attempted to authorize a $75 hold on his primary card. The system immediately bounced it back, declined. A second attempt was made on his secondary corporate card, declined. I imagined his slight irritation as he stood in the foyer muttering about banking glitches while Vanessa waited by the door draped in her stolen designer coat. Eventually, he must have found enough loose cash in his wallet to pay for a standard cab, because 50 minutes later, the restaurant's merchant ID popped up on my incoming alert feed. La Maison Royale is famous for two things: their imported white truffles and their absolute lack of patience for broke patrons. Derek, desperate to maintain his facade of a high-rolling venture capitalist, clearly ordered without looking at the prices. I did not need to hear the conversation to know he was sitting across from Vanessa, pouring premium mimosas and promising her the world. He was likely bragging about his upcoming $5 million seed round, spinning tales of massive corporate expansion, and assuring her that her underground debt would be handled by the end of the week. Then came the moment of truth. At exactly 11:45, the restaurant ran the check. The total was $280 for breakfast. I sat back in my chair and watched the firewall logs light up in a brilliant cascade of red error messages. Derek would have handed the waiter his sleek, heavy metal credit card with a practiced, arrogant flick of his wrist. He probably did not even break eye contact with Vanessa as he dropped it onto the leather folder. The waiter, trained to be discreet and efficient, would have walked to the terminal at the back of the dining room. The first ping hit my dashboard. Attempted charge of $280. Status: blocked due to reported fraud. I could perfectly envision the waiter returning to the table, his posture stiff, his voice lowered to spare the other wealthy patrons from the awkwardness. "I am very sorry, sir, but this card was declined. Do you have another form of payment?" Derek would have scoffed, his face flushing with a mix of anger and embarrassment. He would have blamed the bank, blamed a security hold, blamed anything but his own empty pockets. He confidently reached into his designer wallet and pulled out his secondary platinum card, the one directly tied to my pristine credit line. The second ping hit my screen. Status: locked. Account frozen by primary holder. The waiter would have run the card returned to the table and delivered the exact same humiliating news. By now, the facade was cracking. The nearby tables filled with Chicago's actual elite would be casting sideways glances at the commotion. Derek, sweating and panicking, began throwing every piece of plastic he owned at the waiter. Ping. Corporate debit card. Declined. Account balance 0. Ping. Emergency credit card. Declined. Reported stolen. 4 consecutive denials in the middle of a Michelin-rated bistro. The public humiliation must have been absolutely suffocating. Derek was a man who survived entirely on optics. Stripped of his purchasing power, he was nothing but a fraud in an expensive suit, begging a waiter to run the cards just one more time. Across the table, Vanessa's reaction would have been instantaneous and ruthless. She was not a woman who stayed for the struggle. She was a parasite looking for a host. Watching Derek fail to pay for a simple breakfast would have shattered the illusion of the wealthy savior he had promised to be. The thinly veiled disgust would have washed over her perfectly contoured face. She was drowning in massive debt to a dangerous gambling syndicate, and she had just realized her only lifeline was completely broke. I watched the final digital breadcrumb drop into my server logs. Derek, desperate to prove it was all a massive banking error, grabbed his smartphone and attempted to log directly into his mobile banking application to show Vanessa his funds. He typed in his password. The server recorded the access attempt. The protocol I had established the night before engaged instantly. The bank app bypassed the standard dashboard and forced him onto a security landing page. I knew exactly what he was staring at on his glowing phone screen. Available balance, $0.00. Account status, frozen pending spousal fraud investigation. Please contact your local branch with valid photo identification and legal counsel. He was locked out. He had no money, no credit, no access, and no escape. The waitstaff was hovering, waiting for their payment. The ex-wife he had tried so desperately to impress was looking at him like he was a contagious disease, and the $5 million venture capital pitch he was banking on was rapidly approaching, built entirely on a foundation of lies that I was already preparing to demolish. I closed my laptop with a soft, definitive snap. The morning humiliation was complete, but this was only the opening move. I picked up my coffee mug, taking a slow, satisfying sip, and walked out to the living room to meet my sister-in-law. It was time to draft the legal paperwork. I walked out to the living room to meet my sister-in-law. It was time to draft the legal paperwork. Jasmine was already sitting at the massive oak dining table in her home, surrounded by neat stacks of color-coded legal folders. My brother Connor was in the backyard building a snow fort, with Leo keeping him completely insulated from the adult warfare happening indoors. Jasmine looked up from her laptop, adjusting her gold-rimmed glasses. As a corporate litigator, Jasmine was a force of nature. She was a brilliant, striking black woman who dismantled Fortune 500 companies before her morning espresso. Right now, she was directing that lethal legal expertise entirely toward my husband. "Did he try to pay for breakfast yet?" Jasmine asked, handing me a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. 4 declined cards in a row, I replied, sitting across from her. He is currently locked out of everything. I could easily picture the agonizing standoff that had just occurred at La Maison Royale. After the 4th declined card, Derek would have been forced to do the one thing he feared more than death itself. He had to ask a woman for money. Not just any woman, but the ex-wife he was actively trying to impress. Vanessa, seething with barely concealed rage and humiliation, would have had to dig into her own designer purse and hand over a credit card she was likely struggling to pay off. The illusion of the wealthy, protective venture capitalist was dead. Derek had been reduced to a financial liability before the appetizers were even cleared. Humiliated and desperate, Derek did not drive Vanessa back to our house. He dropped her off at her apartment with a frantic, stammering excuse about a banking error and sped directly to our primary financial institution in downtown Chicago. My phone buzzed on the table, indicating a security ping from the bank branch. He had arrived. Derek was not a man who handled inconvenience with grace. He would have bypassed the standard teller line entirely, storming up to the premier client desk, slamming his useless platinum cards onto the marble counter. He would demand to see the branch manager, his voice echoing across the quiet lobby, threatening to move his millions to a competitor if the glitch was not fixed immediately. But there was no glitch. The branch manager, a polite but firm professional, would pull up the account notes. "Sir," the manager would say, looking at the bright red alerts covering Derek's profile. These accounts were not frozen by a system error. The primary account holder placed an immediate lockdown on all lines of credit due to unauthorized corporate spending and suspected wire fraud. Derek would argue, insisting he had marital rights to the funds. He would demand they override my commands, but the manager would simply shake his head. When a certified forensic accountant flags an account with a documented trail of suspicious shell company transfers, the bank complies. Derek was explicitly informed that lifting the restriction required my physical presence, my signature, and a sworn legal affidavit. He was completely powerless. My phone vibrated violently against the wood of the dining table. The screen lit up with Derek's name. It was the first of what would become an avalanche of frantic attempts to reach me. "Let it ring," Jasmine said without looking up from her legal briefs. "Let him stew in the panic." I watched the incoming call screen flash, then go dark as it diverted straight to voicemail. Less than 10 seconds later, it rang again. Then a barrage of text messages flooded in. "Hannah, answer the phone. This is not funny. The bank is holding my funds hostage. Call them and fix this. Whatever you are mad about, we can talk about it tonight. Just unfreeze the cards. I need to pay vendors." The text shifted rapidly from demanding to pleading to outright panicked. He was finally realizing that I had not just packed a bag and gone to my mother's house to cry. I was not throwing a typical marital fit. I had executed a targeted tactical strike on his financial respiratory system, and I had done it right before the most critical week of his professional life. Derek's entire identity and his ability to close the $5 million seed round with the venture capital firm next Friday relied heavily on his ability to project success. He needed capital to host investor dinners, to pay for his overpriced leased office space, and to keep his fake marketing consultants on the payroll. Without my credit line keeping him afloat, his startup was effectively bankrupt. Sitting in the driver's seat of his parked car outside the bank, Derek must have been struggling to breathe. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him. He had alienated his wife, infuriated his ex-wife, and completely lost access to his cash flow. But his nightmare was only just beginning. Jasmine tapped her manicured finger against a printed document on the table. "I just received confirmation from the startup's banking portal," she said, a sharp, satisfied smile crossing her face. "The automated notice just went out." On cue, my phone received a copied alert from Derek's corporate account. I knew exactly what he was seeing on his own screen in his car. An automated email marked high priority from his business banking institution. He opened the email expecting a routine statement. Instead, he read a notification that would stop his heart. His access to the startup company's operational funds had been temporarily frozen. The reason listed in bold black letters stared back at him. "Account locked pending spousal fraud investigation." I set my phone face down on the massive oak dining table. The digital strike was confirmed. Derek was currently sitting in a freezing car outside a bank branch, staring at a screen that told him his entire corporate existence was under review. I looked up from the device, feeling an immense, icy calm wash over me. Jasmine stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding the entire room. She was wearing a tailored emerald green pantsuit, her natural hair styled in a flawless crown. She exuded the kind of terrifying, effortless competence that made opposing counsel settle out of court before she even bothered to open her briefcase. She walked over and set a steaming mug of black coffee in front of me. Next to the mug, she dropped a thick leather-bound legal binder. The heavy thud of the binder hitting the solid wood echoed through the quiet house. My brother Connor and his wife Jasmine had a home that was a fortress of genuine stability. It was the exact opposite of the flashy, debt-ridden illusion Derek had built. Connor was a pediatric surgeon. He was currently out in the backyard, building a snow fort with Leo, keeping my 6-year-old son completely insulated from the adult warfare happening indoors. Connor had taken one look at my face when I showed up at 2 in the morning, ushered Leo inside, and immediately called his wife down to the kitchen. Jasmine had not slept a single minute since. She spent the entire night turning her elegant dining room into a ruthless legal war room, pulling corporate filings, drafting subpoenas, and cross-referencing the encrypted drive I had handed her. Jasmine pulled out the chair next to mine and sat down. She did not offer me pity. She knew I did not want it, and I certainly did not need it. Instead, she flipped open the heavy binder to a section tabbed in bright red. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at a highlighted bank transfer log. "You caught the shell company transfers and the credit card abuse," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "But you missed something because you were only looking at his current operating accounts." I dug into the historical data from the past 90 days. He did not just buy her a bag, Hannah. I leaned forward, my forensic accountant instincts instantly overriding the lingering exhaustion of the sleepless night. "What did he touch?" I asked, scanning the columns of numbers on the printed page. Jasmine slapped a withdrawal authorization form onto the table. It bore my signature, but the loops and angles were entirely wrong. It was a sloppy forgery. "Derek has been siphoning money from Leo's College 529 plan," she said, her words slicing through the air like a scalpel. "He pulled $50,000 out in 3 separate transactions over the last 2 months. He took the massive early withdrawal tax penalties straight to the chin just to get the liquid cash. And he routed every single penny directly to cover the invoices for the shell company registered in Vanessa's name." The air in my lungs turned to pure ice. Stealing from me was one thing. Using my pristine credit score to buy luxury items for the woman who mocked me in my own home was infuriating, but ultimately fixable. But stealing from our 6-year-old son, draining the educational fund I had meticulously built since the day Leo was born, that was an entirely different level of depravity. Derek was not just a pathetic, cheating husband trying to show off anymore. He was a predator stealing from his own child to pay for his ex-wife's illegal debts. "How did he bypass the dual authorization?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "I set that account up specifically so neither of us could withdraw a single dollar without joint approval and a phone verification." Jasmine pulled out another document from the binder. "He filed a fraudulent hardship claim," she explained, sliding the paper toward me. "He submitted fake medical invoices to the brokerage claiming Leo needed emergency specialized treatments not covered by our health insurance. He used Connor's medical license number to make the documentation look legitimate to the bank tellers. He essentially committed wire fraud, identity theft, and medical billing fraud in one sweeping motion." I looked out the large bay window. In the backyard, Connor was lifting Leo up to place a carrot nose on their snowman. My brother was a pediatric surgeon who dedicated his life to saving children. Derek had used his medical license to steal from one. "Connor is going to destroy him for using his medical license," I stated, not looking away from the window. Jasmine nodded, a dark fire lighting up her eyes. "Connor already knows. He is outside playing in the snow right now, because if he stays in this room looking at these documents, he might drive downtown and put your husband in the intensive care unit." We agreed that destroying him legally and financially is the much smarter play. It leaves less of a mess for us to clean up later. I looked back down at the binder. The sheer volume of evidence Jasmine had compiled in less than 12 hours was staggering. Derek thought he was a criminal mastermind, but he had left a digital blood trail a mile wide. He transferred $50,000 of his son's future to a woman who probably blew it at an underground blackjack table in a single weekend. He fully expected to replenish the stolen funds using the $5 million venture capital seed round, closing next Friday, thinking I would never notice the temporary dip in the investment balances. "We have him dead to rights," I said, closing the binder with a firm snap. "The financial audit alone will put him in federal prison." "What is our first move?" Jasmine leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. A lethal courtroom-ready smile spread across her face. It was the kind of smile that promised absolute ruin for anyone standing on the opposite side of the aisle. "I have already filed the emergency injunction," Jasmine said. "Let the games begin." My phone vibrating against the solid oak table shattered the quiet intensity of the room. It was not a single isolated notification. It was a relentless mechanical buzz that signaled a coordinated digital assault. Jasmine did not even flinch. She simply took a slow sip of her coffee, her dark eyes tracking the glowing screen of my device. I picked up the phone, expecting another pathetic string of text messages from Derek begging me to unfreeze his corporate accounts. Instead, I was met with an avalanche of social media notifications, direct messages, and missed calls from people I had not spoken to in months. Mutual friends, neighbors from our upscale Chicago suburb, mothers from Leo's elementary school parent-teacher association, and a handful of distant relatives were flooding my inbox. I swiped open the first notification. It was a link to a video Derek had just posted across all his public platforms. He had tagged me, ensuring the algorithm would push his broadcast directly into the feeds of everyone we knew. I tapped play. Derek was sitting in the front seat of his car. He had purposefully messed up his usually immaculate hair to look disheveled and frantic. He was wearing the same suit from last night, but he had loosened the tie and unbuttoned the collar to project the image of a man whose life had suddenly violently derailed. The performance was nothing short of a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. He was a salesman, and right now he was selling the ultimate product, his own victimhood. "I do not normally post personal things on here," Derek began, his voice trembling with perfectly calibrated emotion. "But I am desperate. Last night, my wife Hannah suffered a severe mental breakdown. I woke up this morning to find my house empty and my 6-year-old son gone. She kidnapped him in the middle of the night." He paused, bringing a hand to his face to wipe away a non-existent tear. I watched him squeeze his eyes shut, playing the role of the devastated, terrified father to absolute perfection. "She has been struggling with baseless jealousy and paranoia for months." He continued, staring directly into the camera lens with a heartbreakingly earnest expression. "I tried to get her psychiatric help. I tried to be patient. But last night she completely lost her grip on reality. She drained our bank accounts to fund her escape and took my boy. Hannah, if you are watching this, please bring Leo home. I will forgive everything. Just let me know my son is safe." The video ended. I sat back in my chair staring at the frozen frame of his tragic, pleading face. It was a brilliant, terrifying tactical maneuver. Derek realized he was backed into a corner financially, so he had launched a preemptive strike on my reputation. By framing me as a jealous, unstable woman having a psychotic break, he was destroying my credibility before I even had the chance to expose his fraud. If I came forward now and accused him of stealing and cheating, his audience would simply dismiss it as the paranoid delusions of a crazy ex-wife. The messages pouring into my phone were vicious. People who had smiled at me at neighborhood barbecues were now calling me a monster. "How could you do this to him?" one message read. "Leo needs his father. You need to be locked in a psychiatric ward." Another message from a mutual friend chimed in. "Derek is a good man. You are cruel and unstable for taking his son over some petty jealousy. Bring the boy back before the police hunt you down." I set the phone back on the table. I did not cry. I did not rush to type out a frantic public rebuttal. As a forensic accountant, I know that engaging with a smear campaign only gives it oxygen. You do not fight a fabricated narrative with emotion. You fight it with cold, irrefutable data. Jasmine leaned over and glanced at the onslaught of hateful notifications lighting up my screen. She let out a short, cynical laugh. "Defamation, libel, and filing a false public report." Jasmine noted her legal mind, instantly cataloging his offenses. He is digging his own grave with a backhoe. He thinks controlling the social narrative will save him from a federal indictment. Let the flying monkeys scream, Hannah. Do not engage with a single one of them. I had no intention of engaging. I knew exactly why Derek was playing this specific card. He needed capital, and he needed it immediately. While I sat in the safety of Connor and Jasmine's home, Derek was busy leveraging his newly acquired sympathy. I knew his playbook inside and out. He would use this manufactured tragedy to corner a wealthy, gullible friend. Sure enough, a quick check of the alternative financial tracking software I had installed on his devices showed a massive spike in his digital wallet activity. Derek had reached out to Brad, a wealthy former fraternity brother who was notorious for having more money than sense. Derek had undoubtedly spun a tragic tale over the phone, claiming his crazy wife had frozen his assets out of spite, and he needed emergency funds to hire a private investigator to track down his kidnapped son. The lie worked flawlessly. Within the hour, Brad wired $10,000 directly into Derek's alternative digital wallet. Derek did not use a single cent of that money to look for Leo. He did not hire a lawyer. He immediately routed $8,000 to Vanessa to placate her panic and keep her from walking away. He used the remaining $2,000 to book a luxury suite at a downtown hotel, ensuring he had a sleek, impressive background for his upcoming virtual meetings. He was still trying to keep the illusion alive, still desperately clinging to the hope that his Friday venture capital pitch would magically erase his crimes. My phone screen finally went dark, the notifications temporarily pausing. I picked the device back up. I did not write a public post defending my sanity. I did not reply to the judgmental mothers from the school district or the angry relatives who thought I was a monster. I opened a direct message to Derek. I did not type a single word. I did not demand an apology for the video or ask him how he slept. I simply opened the photo album on my phone, selected the high-resolution scan Jasmine had prepared, and hit send. It was a crystal-clear image of the withdrawal slip for Leo's educational fund. The document clearly showed the $50,000 transfer to Vanessa's illegal shell company. Right at the bottom, magnified and undeniable, was Derek's sloppy forged attempt at signing my name. I locked my screen, set the phone down, and took another sip of my coffee. The social war was irrelevant. The real execution had just begun. In his rented luxury suite downtown, Derek stared at the screen of his smartphone. The high-resolution image of the withdrawal slip, complete with his blatantly forged signature, glared back at him. For exactly 5 seconds, genuine terror seized his chest. His heart hammered against his ribs and the color drained from his face. Wire fraud. Identity theft. The reality of federal crimes briefly pierced his delusion. But Derek was a man who had spent his entire adult life outrunning consequences on a bridge of charm and lies. The panic faded almost as quickly as it had arrived, replaced by the intoxicating, dangerous arrogance of a lifelong salesman. I knew his psychological profile intimately. I knew he would immediately rationalize the theft. In his twisted mind, draining our son's educational fund was not a crime. It was a temporary bridge loan. He convinced himself that as the father, he had a right to leverage those assets to secure his company's future. He believed that once the venture capital deal closed on Friday, he would simply slip the $50,000 back into the account, plus a little extra, to make himself feel generous. He assumed my text message was just an empty threat, a desperate attempt by a scorned wife to rattle his nerves. He believed his social media smear campaign had already neutralized my credibility. He thought he was untouchable. His focus was violently pulled back to the present by the sound of Vanessa pacing across the expensive carpet of the hotel room. She was practically vibrating with panic. Her perfectly manicured fingernails dug into her palms. The $8,000 Derek had scraped together from his fraternity brother was a pathetic bandage on a massive bleeding wound. Her underground bookies were not interested in partial payments. They were calling her phone relentlessly, leaving voicemails that promised brutal physical consequences if the remaining debt was not cleared immediately. Derek stood up, smoothed the lapels of his suit jacket, and walked over to her. He placed his hands firmly on her trembling shoulders. He looked deeply into her eyes and turned on the exact same hypnotic sociopathic charm he used to manipulate angel investors. "You need to breathe, V," he said, his voice dropping into a smooth, reassuring cadence. "What Hannah is doing is just a minor legal hiccup. She is an angry, jealous woman throwing a tantrum because she knows she cannot compete with you. Her little banking freeze means absolutely nothing." Vanessa looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. "But the debt collectors," she stammered. "They said they are coming to my apartment tomorrow." Derek offered a confident, dismissive laugh. "Let them knock. You are staying here in this suite until Friday." By Friday afternoon, I am walking out of a boardroom with $5 million in liquid capital. The investors are practically begging to give me their money. "Once the ink dries on that term sheet, your debt is erased, and we are booking first-class tickets to Paris. Just trust the process." He painted a picture so vivid, so dripping in guaranteed wealth, that Vanessa, driven entirely by her own desperation, chose to believe the illusion. She leaned into his chest, letting out a shaky breath, completely oblivious to the fact that her so-called savior was financially ruined and actively being hunted by a corporate litigator. With Vanessa successfully pacified, Derek pivoted seamlessly back into his role as a visionary chief executive officer. He left the hotel and drove to his leased startup office in the trendy Fulton Market District. He strutted through the glass doors carrying a tray of expensive artisanal coffees for his small team of loyal, underpaid developers. He greeted them with bright smiles and motivational platitudes about disrupting the industry and changing the digital landscape. He was the perfect, inspiring leader. It was a breathtaking performance. He locked himself inside his glass-walled corner office, pulled down the privacy blinds, and opened his laptop. He had 3 days to finalize his pitch deck for the venture capital firm. The investors had requested a comprehensive review of his operating expenses and projected revenue streams. Derek opened his master spreadsheet, completely unaware that I had already downloaded and preserved the original untampered files. He began to meticulously falsify his financial history. He erased the blatant luxury purchases, hiding the 5-star hotel stays and expensive dinners under vague categories labeled as client acquisition and market research. The most massive problem was the $50,000 he had funneled to Vanessa's illegal shell company. Derek did not hesitate. He reclassified the entire amount as aggressive research and development consulting fees, fabricating a series of fake deliverables to justify the cost. Then he inflated his projected user growth by 300%, creating a hockey stick revenue graph that looked spectacular on a presentation slide, but was mathematically impossible in reality. He looked at the fabricated numbers glowing on his monitor and smiled. He actually believed his own lies. He thought he was a financial genius navigating the complex world of high-stakes corporate finance. He viewed me as a boring, predictable accountant who simply did not understand the aggressive strategies required to build a tech empire. A sharp chime echoed from his laptop speakers. An email notification slid into the corner of his screen. It was from the lead partner at the venture capital firm, confirming the final agenda for Friday's signing meeting. Derek opened the message, quickly scanning the standard corporate pleasantries. The firm requested his presence at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon at their downtown headquarters. However, a bolded paragraph at the very bottom of the email caught his attention. The investors stated that due to new internal compliance regulations, they were requiring a rapid verification of the startup's ledger before authorizing the final wire transfer. To facilitate this, a third-party forensic auditor would be joining the due diligence meeting on Friday to review his submitted expense reports. Derek leaned back in his expensive ergonomic chair and let out a scoff of pure amusement. A forensic auditor. In his mind, an auditor was just a timid, socially awkward corporate drone with a calculator and a checklist. He had spent his entire career charming compliance officers and talking his way around financial guidelines. He possessed an unwavering belief that his charisma could blind anyone to the truth. He did not feel a shred of anxiety. He closed the email, cracked his knuckles, and went back to admiring his fraudulent pitch deck. He brushed off the warning, completely arrogant, overconfident, and tragically unsuspecting of the absolute slaughter waiting for him in that boardroom. By Thursday morning, the claustrophobia of the downtown hotel suite was beginning to fracture Vanessa's fragile patience. I knew this because my smartphone buzzed, alerting me that my smart home security system had just registered the front door code being entered at exactly 10 o'clock. Sitting safely at the kitchen island in Connor and Jasmine's house, I set down my coffee mug and opened the live camera feed on my encrypted tablet. Jasmine walked into the kitchen fully dressed for a day in court and leaned over my shoulder to watch the high-definition broadcast. Derek was ushering Vanessa through the grand entryway of our suburban Chicago home. He swept his arm across the spacious foyer, presenting the meticulously clean, sprawling space as if he had laid every single brick with his own 2 hands. He desperately needed to pacify her. Her illegal gambling debt was a ticking time bomb, and his frozen bank accounts offered zero financial comfort. He needed a physical, tangible asset to anchor his massive web of lies. Vanessa stepped inside, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She did not express gratitude or awe at the beautiful home. Instead, she immediately began critiquing the space with an air of unearned superiority. She ran a manicured finger along the edge of the custom entryway table and let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. "The open floor plan is decent, Derek," she drawled, her voice echoing perfectly through the hidden microphone of my living room camera. "But this decor is painfully middle class. It feels like a catalog for boring suburban housewives. That gray sectional couch has to go entirely. And the kitchen backsplash is far too muted. I will need to hire a real interior decorator to rip all this out once the dust settles and we take over." Derek did not defend the home I had spent 3 years curating with my own hard-earned money. He simply laughed, a hollow, desperate sound designed entirely to appease her ego. "You can rip out whatever you want, V," Derek replied smoothly. "I never liked her taste anyway. Hannah always played it too safe. But look at the square footage. Look at the equity sitting right here in these walls. This is our safety net." Derek led her into the kitchen, leaning casually against the marble island I had paid for in cash. He poured them both glasses of sparkling water from the refrigerator, continuing his grand performance. "The venture capital deal is an absolute lock for tomorrow afternoon," he assured her, his voice brimming with manufactured confidence. "But I know you are stressed about the timeline with your collectors. If the wire transfer from the investors takes a few business days to clear corporate compliance, I already have a backup plan. I am going to use this house as collateral for a rapid bridge loan. The equity here is easily worth $700,000. I can pull out a couple of $100,000 in a matter of days to cover your debt completely." Vanessa leaned against the counter, crossing her arms defensively. "Are you sure you can do that? What about Hannah? Will she not try to claim half of this place in the divorce? She locked your bank accounts, Derek. She is going to fight you for this house." Derek scoffed, shaking his head with an expression of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "Let her try," he sneered. "She is just an accountant, V. She is not a lawyer. She thinks throwing a tantrum and running away gives her leverage. But she abandoned the marital home. That is strike one in any family court. I have already planted the narrative online that she is experiencing a severe mental health crisis. By the time my legal team is done spinning this, a judge will hand me the keys to this property, full custody of Leo, and probably order her to pay me alimony for emotional distress. I am going to strip her of everything. She will be lucky if she walks away with the clothes on her back. I am taking the house, the savings, and the investments." She thought she could outsmart me, but she just handed me the perfect excuse to ruin her. Sitting miles away, I watched his delusional monologue play out on my screen. He was lecturing his ex-wife about marital property laws with absolute certainty, completely oblivious to the fact that he possessed the legal understanding of a toddler. He was standing in a house he did not own, plotting to steal equity he did not possess to pay off a loan shark hunting a woman who viewed him as a disposable wallet. It was a spectacular symphony of incompetence. Jasmine checked the gold watch on her wrist and offered a cold, predatory smile. "Right on schedule," she whispered. Suddenly, the audio feed on my tablet picked up a loud, sharp sound. A heavy, authoritative knocking echoed through the front door of the house. It was not the polite, rhythmic tap of a delivery driver dropping off a package. It was the heavy, forceful pounding of law enforcement demanding immediate attention. On the screen, Derek paused. His arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he smoothed his features back into a mask of mild annoyance. Probably just a neighbor, he told Vanessa, waving a dismissive hand. Or someone from the homeowners association complaining about the garbage bins being left out. "I will handle it. Wait here and start picking out which walls you want to tear down first." I switched the camera view on my tablet from the kitchen to the exterior porch feed. Derek marched through the foyer and pulled open the heavy wooden front door, arranging his face into a charming, neighborly smile. That smile instantly vanished. Standing on the front porch was not a complaining neighbor. It was not a courier delivering a package. It was the local county sheriff dressed in full uniform, a heavy-duty utility belt resting at his waist, and a thick yellow legal clipboard clasped firmly in his hands. Derek stared at the silver badge pinned to the chest of the uniformed officer. The crisp morning air swept into the warm foyer, carrying with it a sharp bite of reality that Derek was desperately trying to ignore. "Derek the sheriff," asked, his voice a flat, authoritative baritone. "Yes, officer," Derek replied, deploying his most cooperative, non-threatening smile. "Is there a problem? If this is about the alarm system, I can assure you everything is fine. My ex-wife and I were just looking at some remodeling options for the kitchen." The sheriff did not smile back. He did not engage in small talk. He simply raised the yellow clipboard and detached a thick packet of legal documents stapled together at the corner. He thrust the papers toward Derek's chest. "You are hereby served," the sheriff stated mechanically. "This is an official notice of eviction. You are required by order of the county court to vacate these premises." Derek took the papers, his eyes scanning the bold black text at the top of the page. The legal jargon blurred together. For a fleeting second, his brain short-circuited. Then a loud, incredulous laugh burst from his chest. He looked at the sheriff, shaking his head as if he had just been handed a parking ticket for a car he did not own. He was a master manipulator, and he genuinely believed he could talk his way out of a court order on his own front porch. "Officer, there has been a massive misunderstanding," Derek chuckled, leaning casually against the doorframe to project total confidence. "This is my house. My wife Hannah is currently experiencing a severe mental health episode. She locked my bank accounts last night and is clearly trying to use the legal system to throw a tantrum. This is a domestic dispute, not a housing issue. I have marital rights to this property. I own half the equity in these walls." "Actually, Derek, you do not own a single nail in those walls." The voice did not belong to the sheriff. It came from the driveway, sharp, clear, and cutting through the freezing morning air like a newly sharpened blade. Derek craned his neck, looking past the officer's broad shoulder. Stepping out from behind the imposing frame of the sheriff's cruiser was Jasmine. She looked like absolute royalty walking onto a battlefield. She wore a tailored charcoal wool coat over her emerald green power suit, her heels clicking rhythmically against the icy concrete. As a top-tier corporate litigator, my sister-in-law did not do anything quietly. She moved with a calculated, terrifying grace, her dark eyes locked directly onto Derek's rapidly paling face. Derek's arrogant posture stiffened instantly. "Jasmine, what are you doing here? This is between me and your sister-in-law. Tell Hannah to stop playing these ridiculous games and come home before she embarrasses herself any further." Jasmine stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She adjusted her gold-rimmed glasses and looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. It was the exact look a scientist gives a bug under a microscope right before dissecting it. "I am not here as your family," Derek, Jasmine said, her voice dropping into a deadly professional cadence. "I am standing on this property as the retained legal counsel for the primary owner of this estate, and you are severely overestimating your position on the chessboard." Derek scoffed, crossing his arms defensively to shield himself from the cold reality setting in. "We are married. Illinois is an equitable distribution state. Whatever she owns, I own. She cannot just kick me out of my own house with a piece of paper." "That would be a brilliant legal argument if you actually owned the house," Jasmine countered smoothly, taking a step up the porch. "But you see, my client is a forensic accountant. She spends her entire life tracking financial liabilities and mitigating risk. Do you honestly think she would marry a man with your staggering lack of fiscal discipline without building a titanium firewall around her major assets?" Derek frowned, the first genuine wave of panic finally piercing his delusion. "What are you talking about?" Jasmine pulled a slim black leather folder from her briefcase and opened it. "This house is not marital property. It was never marital property. It is entirely owned and operated by a single-member limited liability company named Horizon Holdings. Hannah established that LLC and purchased this estate in cash 3 years before you even met her. There is no mortgage. There is no commingling of marital funds. You never contributed a single cent to the principal, the property taxes, or the maintenance costs. You paid the cable bill, Derek. Paying for premium sports channels does not grant you equity in a multi-million-dollar estate." Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The paperwork in his hands suddenly felt as heavy as a lead weight. Behind him, standing in the archway of the kitchen, Vanessa was listening to every single word. The glass of sparkling water slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crash, shattering into dozens of pieces. The sound of the breaking glass echoed through the house, shattering the illusion Derek had spent the entire morning building. The color had completely drained from Vanessa's perfectly contoured face. The $700,000 in equity Derek had just promised her a few minutes ago was evaporating into thin air. He was not a wealthy venture capitalist offering her a lifeline. He was a broke tenant facing imminent homelessness. Because your name is nowhere on the deed, the operating agreement, or the title. Jasmine continued, her voice echoing perfectly into the foyer so Vanessa could hear every devastating detail. You are legally classified as a tenant at will. And as of this morning, the property owner has officially terminated your tenancy. Your lease has expired. Derek's hands began to shake uncontrollably. He looked at the sheriff, his manipulative charm completely failing him. Officer, she cannot do this. I live here. My clothes are here. My office is upstairs. You cannot throw me out on the street in the middle of winter. The sheriff kept his hands resting near his utility belt, completely unmoved by Derek's sudden pleading. The paperwork is verified and signed by a judge, sir. You have been legally served. This is no longer a domestic dispute. It is a civil eviction, and I am here to enforce the timeline. Timeline. Derek stammered, his eyes darting wildly between the sheriff and Jasmine as his entire fabricated reality collapsed around him. What timeline? Jasmine stepped up onto the porch, invading his personal space, just enough to assert total legal dominance. She looked down at her gold wristwatch, the metal gleaming in the pale winter sun. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate my client's property, Jasmine stated, her voice devoid of any warmth, sympathy, or mercy. If you are found inside these walls or anywhere on this physical property after 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, you will be arrested, handcuffed, and charged with criminal trespassing. Derek stumbled backward, leaning heavily against the doorframe for support. His illusion of power, his grand promises to his ex-wife, his absolute certainty that he could control the narrative had been crushed under the heel of an airtight legal contract. He had nothing left to bargain with. He was entirely stripped of his leverage. Jasmine turned on her heel, preparing to walk back down the driveway to her waiting SUV. She paused at the bottom of the concrete steps, glancing back over her shoulder with a final, devastating smile. Pack light, Derek. You do not own the furniture either. Jasmine's SUV disappeared down the street, leaving Derek standing on the frozen porch with the eviction notice trembling in his hand. The reality of his situation crashed over him. He turned back into the foyer, stepping carefully around the puddle of sparkling water and shattered glass. Vanessa was already rushing up the stairs, her previous air of entitlement completely erased by sheer panic. I did not need to be physically present to know exactly how the subsequent hours unfolded. The digital breadcrumbs and the frantic, unencrypted text messages I intercepted later painted a flawless, pathetic picture of their rapid descent. Within 2 hours, they were shoving whatever clothes Derek could claim into black plastic garbage bags. The designer suitcases, it turned out, were purchased on my primary card, and Derek was too terrified of a grand theft charge to take them. They loaded his leased sedan in absolute silence. His phone remained locked out of his accounts, his financial apps frozen, his credit lines severed. With zero access to cash, his grand promises of booking a luxury downtown penthouse evaporated instantly. He drove them to a dilapidated roadside motel on the outskirts of the city, the only place willing to accept the handful of crumpled $20 bills he had managed to scrounge from his glove compartment. The room smelled heavily of stale smoke and industrial bleach. The floral bedspread was thin and faded, and the neon sign outside the window flickered with a harsh buzzing sound that penetrated the thin glass. This was a brutal, jarring contrast to the $500 wine and the Michelin-rated bistro of the previous evening. Vanessa dropped her $15,000 Hermes bag onto the stained carpet. She did not even bother taking off her designer coat. She stood in the center of the cramped room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her breathing shallow and erratic. The sophisticated, untouchable ex-wife facade was entirely gone. In its place stood a terrified, desperate woman backed into a very dark corner. A motel. Vanessa snapped, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and absolute dread. You brought me to a $20 a night roadside motel. You told me you were a millionaire. You told me your startup was flush with cash. You promised me my problems were handled. Derek ran a hand through his messy hair, pacing the narrow strip of floor between the cheap bed and the television stand. It is just temporary, V. I told you Hannah is pulling a crazy legal stunt. She froze the accounts, but it is just a delay. I will have it all sorted out by the end of the week. The end of the week is too late, Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking as she lost the last shred of her composure. She stepped forward and shoved him hard in the chest. Do you not understand anything? This is not a credit card bill, Derek. This is not a mortgage payment. These people do not care about your marital disputes or your frozen bank accounts. They do not send eviction notices on yellow clipboards. Derek stumbled back against the flimsy wooden door, his eyes widening as her panic finally began to infect him. V, calm down. We can figure this out. We just need to lay low for a few days. There is nothing to figure out, she shrieked, tears of genuine terror welling in her eyes. I owe them $200,000. I lied to them and said the transfer was clearing yesterday. When it did not hit their account, they called me. They know where I live. They know where my sister lives. If you don't get me that money by Friday, they are going to break my legs, Derek. The words hung heavily in the stale air of the motel room. The ugly, terrifying truth was finally out in the open. Vanessa had never returned to Derek's life because she was impressed by his newfound success. She had not sat in my dining room sipping vintage wine because she missed his company. She was an absolute parasite, drowning in massive debt to an illegal underground gambling syndicate. She had targeted Derek because she knew he was arrogant, insecure, and stupid enough to drain his own family dry just to play the wealthy hero. Derek stared at her, the gravity of her situation finally penetrating his thick skull. He had stolen $50,000 from his own son's college fund to pay the initial installment, funneling it through her fake shell company. He had risked federal wire fraud to keep her safe, and he now realized it was not even close to enough to satisfy the loan sharks hunting her down. Please, Vanessa sobbed, her manicured hands covering her face as her shoulders shook. You said you had the money. You promised me you would protect me. Derek could not handle the sight of her breaking down. His ego battered and bruised from the morning's intense humiliation, and the brutal eviction flared up in a final, desperate act of self-preservation. He could not accept that he was a broke, evicted failure hiding in a cheap motel. He needed to be the savior. His narcissistic delusion overrode every basic survival instinct he had left. He stepped forward and grabbed her hands, pulling them gently away from her tear-stained face. Listen to me, he said, his voice dropping into that smooth, practiced pitch he reserved exclusively for the boardroom. You are not going to get hurt. I have this completely under control. Vanessa sniffled, looking up at him with desperate red-rimmed eyes. How you do not even have enough money to buy us dinner tonight. I do not need my current bank accounts, Derek said, his eyes gleaming with a manic, delusional confidence. This Friday at 2 o'clock, I am walking into the biggest venture capital firm in Chicago. The $5 million seed round is a guaranteed lock. The investors are completely obsessed with my vision. All they have to do is review my expense reports and sign the term sheet. He squeezed her hands tightly, sealing his own spectacular doom. The second the ink dries on that contract, I will wire you $300,000 directly from the corporate seed fund, Derek promised fervently. I swear to you, V, just stay with me until Friday. We are going to be rich. While Derek was busy making promises he could never keep in a cheap roadside motel, I was sitting in the warm, brightly lit kitchen of my brother's house, tracing the very digital footprints that would guarantee his absolute destruction. I had my laptop open on the oak dining table, a second monitor connected to display multiple spreadsheets simultaneously. The intercepted text messages between Derek and Vanessa had given me the motive, but as a forensic accountant, I needed the hard, indisputable data. Courts and federal investigators do not care about frantic motel room conversations. They care about routing numbers, wire transfers, and the irrefutable paper trail of moving capital. I pulled up the bank records I had downloaded from Derek's secure startup drive before fleeing the house. My focus was squarely on the $50,000 he had stolen from Leo's college education fund. I tracked the money as it left the 529 plan, incurring massive early withdrawal penalties, and landed in Derek's primary business checking account. From there, Derek had initiated a wire transfer to a Nevada-based limited liability company. On paper, the LLC was listed as a premier media and marketing consulting firm. The registered agent was a clever anagram of Vanessa's maiden name. To an untrained eye or a lazy venture capital analyst doing surface-level due diligence, it looked like a standard corporate expense. A tech startup hiring an external marketing agency is entirely normal. But I do not have an untrained eye. I specialize in tearing apart corporate illusions. I bypassed the surface-level incorporation documents and dug into the Nevada State Registry, pulling the corporate filings to find the beneficial ownership information. Then, using a specialized financial tracking software I utilized for my corporate audits, I ran a deep background search on the routing number associated with Vanessa's shell company. The results loaded onto my second monitor, cascading down the screen in blocks of raw financial data. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the outflow of cash from Vanessa's fraudulent marketing firm. The $50,000 did not stay in her account for more than 2 hours. It was immediately broken down into smaller structured transactions, a classic money laundering technique known as smurfing, designed to evade the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. These smaller transactions were wired to a series of obscure regional banks. From those regional banks, the money was consolidated again and sent offshore, landing in a holding account registered in the Cayman Islands. I tapped my fingers against the edge of the keyboard, my mind racing. Vanessa was not buying designer handbags or funding a lavish lifestyle with this stolen money. The sheer speed and deliberate obfuscation of the transfers painted a much darker picture. I cross-referenced the Cayman Islands holding account against a global database of flagged financial entities I used to screen corporate clients for anti-money laundering compliance. The database returned a massive, glaring red flag. The holding account was a known financial front for a notorious, highly organized underground sports betting and gambling syndicate operating out of the Midwest. I sat back in my chair, the breath slowly leaving my lungs as the entire scope of the situation finally crystallized in my mind. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with terrifying perfect clarity. Vanessa was not a victim of poor shopping habits or credit card debt. She was a degenerate gambler. The panicked text messages about people breaking her legs were not exaggerations. She owed over $200,000 to violent, ruthless loan sharks. And Derek, blinded by his own narcissistic need to play the wealthy savior, had willingly stepped into the crosshairs of a criminal syndicate. He was not just cheating on me. He was actively attempting to use his tech startup as a money laundering vehicle to bail his ex-wife out of a mafia-level debt trap. Footsteps sounded on the hardwood floor behind me. Jasmine walked into the kitchen, having just finished a conference call with her legal team. She poured herself a fresh cup of coffee and walked over to the table, noting the intense focus radiating from my side of the room. "What did you find?" Hannah Jasmine asked, her sharp legal instincts instantly sensing a major shift in the battlefield. I swiveled the secondary monitor so she could see the complex web of wire transfers and flagged offshore accounts. "He is not just a broke, cheating husband trying to show off anymore," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Look at the flow of capital." He took the $50,000 from Leo's account and pushed it through Vanessa's fake marketing firm. She immediately routed it to a Cayman Islands holding account flagged for illicit gambling operations. She owes an underground syndicate $200,000. Jasmine leaned over the table, her dark eyes scanning the transaction logs. Her coffee mug hovered midway to her mouth as her brilliant corporate lawyer brain processed the sheer magnitude of the liability staring back at her. "He promised her he would pay off the rest of the debt by Friday," I continued, tapping the screen. "He fully intends to close that $5 million seed round with the venture capital firm and immediately divert $300,000 of clean investor money to a criminal organization." Jasmine slowly lowered her mug to the table. "The implications are staggering," she murmured. her voice dropping into a razor-sharp analytical cadence. This elevates everything. We are no longer dealing with a simple civil divorce or a standard asset division. This is a federal jurisdiction. If Derek executes that transfer on Friday, he is committing a felony. The venture capital firm's compliance officers would face federal scrutiny and massive fines from the Securities and Exchange Commission if they funded a money laundering operation. Exactly, I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard to compile the raw data into a clean, irrefutable presentation format. Derek thinks he is walking into a routine due diligence meeting to secure his fortune. He has no idea he is walking into a federal crime scene of his own making. The investors are putting $5 million on the table. If I do not stop them, they are going to hand millions of dollars to a man who is actively being hunted by loan sharks. I finalized the document formatting, securing the evidence with encryption signatures that proved the data had not been tampered with. I hit the print command on my laptop. Across the room, the heavy-duty laser printer in Connor's home office whirred to life. The machine hummed steadily, spitting out pages of crisp white paper detailing every single fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, and the undeniable link to the offshore gambling syndicate. I stood up and walked over to the printer, gathering the warm pages into my hands. I aligned the edges perfectly, tapping them against the desk. This was not a divorce settlement anymore. This was an execution warrant. I walked back to the dining table and dropped the heavy stack of paper in front of my sister-in-law. Jasmine looked down at the title page of the audit, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. He is not just a cheater, I told Jasmine, staring at the damning audit report. He is committing federal wire fraud. The morning sun did little to cut through the bitter chill of the Chicago wind as I pulled into the drop-off lane of Leo's elementary school. It was Friday, the day of Derek's highly anticipated venture capital pitch. The day he believed he would secure $5 million, wipe away his ex-wife's criminal gambling debts, and emerge as the untouchable tech visionary he had always pretended to be. I parked my SUV near the front gates, keeping the engine running to maintain the heat inside the cabin. I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned to the back seat, offering my son a warm, reassuring smile. Leo had been incredibly resilient over the past 48 hours at his Uncle Connor's house. I zipped his insulated winter coat up to his chin and adjusted his backpack straps, making sure he felt entirely safe and normal before he stepped out into the bustling schoolyard. I watched him run up the concrete path, waving to a group of his friends, before disappearing safely behind the heavy glass doors of the main building. I let out a slow, steady breath. My most valuable asset was secure. Now I just had to execute the final stages of the corporate demolition. I turned around to walk back to the driver's side of my vehicle, my mind already running through the logistics of the afternoon audit presentation. But my path was suddenly blocked. A dark gray leased luxury sedan had swerved aggressively into the lane, parking at a sharp angle that completely boxed in my SUV. The engine was still idling loudly. The driver's side door shoved open and Derek stepped out onto the freezing pavement. The physical deterioration of the man was absolutely staggering. Just 2 days ago, he had been sipping $500 wine in my dining room, impeccably groomed and radiating arrogant superiority. The man standing before me now looked like a cornered animal. His designer suit was deeply wrinkled, likely because he had slept in it at whatever cheap roadside motel he and Vanessa had been forced into after the eviction. His tie was missing. His collar was unbuttoned, and his usually flawless hair was a chaotic, greasy mess. Dark, heavy bags hung under his bloodshot eyes, betraying the sheer, suffocating panic that had kept him awake all night. He marched toward me, his heavy shoes hitting the asphalt with frantic, uncoordinated, heavy steps. He was desperately trying to project his usual commanding authority, but the illusion was entirely shattered. He looked exactly like what he was, a desperate fraud running out of time. Hannah Derek barked, his voice hoarse and cracking from stress. "Stop walking away from me. We need to talk right now." I did not flinch. I did not back away. I stood my ground next to my car, gripping my keys loosely in my pocket. I looked at him with the exact same detached analytical expression I reserved for hostile corporate executives caught hiding phantom revenue streams. "You are violating the boundary agreements established by my legal counsel Derek," stated my voice as cold and flat as the winter air. "You were explicitly instructed to direct all communications through Jasmine." Derek let out a sharp, erratic laugh, running a trembling hand through his messy hair. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, hoping his physical proximity would intimidate me into submission. "Forget your sister-in-law and her ridiculous legal threats," he hissed, his eyes darting around the busy school parking lot to ensure no other parents were close enough to hear him. "This has gone far enough, Hannah. You have had your fun. You threw your little fit, you embarrassed me at the bank, and you played your petty game with the house. But the game ends today." I stared at him, marveling at the sheer, unadulterated narcissism required to categorize massive financial theft as a petty game. He truly believed his own fabricated reality. He thought he was the main character in a high-stakes drama, and I was just a hysterical obstacle standing in his way. "I have a meeting at 2 o'clock this afternoon that will change our lives forever." Derek continued, his tone shifting rapidly from aggressive to a sickening, manufactured pleading. "The investors are ready to sign the term sheet. $5 million, Hannah. Do you understand what that means? We are going to be rich. We can put all this ugliness behind us. But I need you to drop the eviction and unfreeze my accounts immediately so I can show proof of operational liquidity. You need me to unfreeze the accounts so you can wire $300,000 to an illegal gambling syndicate in the Cayman Islands to save your ex-wife," I corrected him, my voice completely devoid of emotion. The color drained entirely from Derek's face. His jaw dropped slightly, his eyes widening in absolute horror as the realization hit him. He thought his financial maneuvering had been brilliant and untraceable. He had no idea I had already dissected his entire fraudulent ledger. "I know about the shell company, Derek," I continued mercilessly. "I know about the $50,000 you stole from Leo's college fund. I know about the forged signature. You are not a visionary tech founder securing a seed round. You are a desperate man committing federal wire fraud." Derek's panic boiled over into raw, unfiltered desperation. The charming salesman facade disintegrated completely, leaving behind a frantic, vicious manipulator. He took another step forward, his chest heaving. "Do you want Leo to grow up with a bankrupt father?" Derek spat, his voice dropping into a venomous, threatening snarl. "Is that what you want? You are going to ruin your own son's future just to punish me. Unfreeze the accounts, Hannah. Drop the eviction. Stop trying to destroy this family over a stupid mistake." He leaned in closer, his breath forming harsh white clouds in the freezing air, deploying the ultimate sociopathic delusion. "If you fix this right now, I will forgive you for this tantrum. I will pretend none of this ever happened, and we can go back to normal." I looked at the man I had married. He had stolen from our child, betrayed our marriage, and leveraged our entire financial security to bail out his ex-wife. And he honestly believed that he was the one offering forgiveness. "There is no normal to go back to, Derek," I said quietly, turning my body toward my car door. "Have a wonderful pitch meeting today." My dismissal shattered his remaining self-control. His eyes flared with sudden violent rage. He lunged forward, closing the distance between us, and his large hand shot out, clamping down hard around my upper arm. His grip was tight, bruising, designed to physically trap me against the side of the vehicle and force me to submit. "You are not walking away from me until you unlock my money," he growled, pulling me roughly toward him. Before I could react, the screech of heavy tires tearing across the frozen asphalt ripped through the parking lot. A massive black SUV slammed on its brakes, halting violently just inches from where Derek stood. The sudden aggressive arrival sent a shockwave through the cold morning air. The heavy passenger side door flew open. The heavy passenger side door of the black SUV swung open with a violent metallic crack. Jasmine stepped out onto the frozen pavement. She was wearing a stunning tailored crimson wool coat that practically commanded the very air around her. She did not rush. She did not yell. She walked with the precise measured strides of an apex predator, closing in on cornered prey. Her dark eyes locked onto Derek's hand, which was still clamped tightly around my upper arm. "Remove your hand from my client," Jasmine stated, her voice slicing through the biting Chicago wind. It was not a request. It was an absolute non-negotiable legal mandate. Derek flinched instinctively, loosening his grip, but his arrogant pride refused to let him back down completely. He puffed out his chest, trying to tower over the two of us. "This is none of your business, Jasmine," Derek sneered, pointing a shaking finger at her. "This is a private marital dispute. You have no jurisdiction here." Jasmine stopped exactly 2 feet away from him. She reached into her leather briefcase, her movements terrifyingly calm. "Actually, Derek, I have complete jurisdiction," Jasmine replied, pulling out a single sheet of paper stamped with a bright red county seal. "I am not standing here as her sister-in-law. I am standing here as her retained legal counsel. And you are currently violating Illinois Penal Code Section 12-3 regarding assault, simply by aggressively grabbing her arm in a public space." She took a deliberate step forward, forcing Derek to stumble backward to maintain his balance. "Step back 3 feet." "Derek," Jasmine commanded, her voice dropping into a lethal, venomous whisper. "If you breathe on my sister-in-law again, if you so much as raise your voice in her direction, I will have you in a holding cell before your precious venture capital meeting even starts. And good luck closing a $5 million seed round while sitting in county jail wearing an orange jumpsuit." The remaining color drained entirely from Derek's face. He looked from Jasmine's icy stare to the county seal on the legal document she was holding. He knew Jasmine was not bluffing. She was a senior partner at one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in the Midwest. She could ruin his life with a single phone call to the local precinct. He threw his hands up in a defensive gesture, backing away toward his leased sedan. His pathetic attempt at physical intimidation had failed spectacularly, but his ego, bloated and desperate, required the last word. "You think you are so smart?" Derek shouted over his shoulder, his voice echoing across the parking lot as he wrenched open his car door. "You think freezing a few bank accounts gives you the power? You will see, both of you. By 3 o'clock this afternoon, I will have $5 million in liquid capital. I will hire the best divorce attorneys in the state, and I will bury you both in court." He slammed the car door shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The tires squealed aggressively against the asphalt as he sped out of the school drop-off lane, desperately fleeing the reality of his own crumbling existence. I stood there, rubbing my upper arm where his fingers had dug into my winter coat. My heart was pounding, but my mind was completely focused on the timeline. "Are you okay?" Jasmine asked, her corporate lawyer menace instantly vanishing, replaced by genuine sisterly concern. "Did he hurt you?" "I am fine," I said, taking a deep, steadying breath. "He is just panicking. He knows he is running out of time." Jasmine checked her watch. It was 9 in the morning. We had exactly 5 hours until the final execution phase of the operation. "Let him run," Jasmine said, offering a small, dangerous smile. "He thinks he is running toward a fortune. He has no idea he is running straight into a federal trap." We got into Jasmine's SUV and drove directly to her high-rise office building downtown. The morning sun was reflecting off the massive glass skyscrapers of Chicago's financial district. Somewhere in one of those gleaming towers, Derek was likely chugging expensive espresso and rehearsing his fraudulent pitch deck, entirely unaware that the foundation of his fake empire was already rigged to explode. We walked into Jasmine's corner office, which offered a sweeping view of the city skyline. I set up my laptop on the massive mahogany conference table and opened the final encrypted version of my forensic audit report. "Have you confirmed the meeting parameters with the venture capital firm?" I asked, pulling up the digital ledger. Jasmine nodded, taking a seat across from me. "The lead partner, Harrison Wright, confirmed via encrypted email at 8 o'clock this morning. They have reviewed your preliminary findings regarding the offshore shell company. They are absolutely furious. Venture capital firms do not take kindly to being used as unwitting accomplices in federal money laundering schemes. They were prepared to hand Derek $5 million based on his charismatic promises and fabricated growth metrics. When Jasmine, acting as my legal counsel, had anonymously tipped off the firm's compliance department about the pending audit, they had immediately triggered an emergency internal review. They agreed to the ambush. Jasmine continued, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. They want to see him squirm in the boardroom. They want to watch him try to present his fraudulent numbers before they drop the hammer. I looked at the digital clock on my laptop. The countdown was officially on. I opened my email and found the secure link provided by the venture capital firm. It was an official calendar invitation, granting me full security clearance to enter their executive suite at exactly 1:45. Derek had spent the entire morning shouting about his impending wealth, promising to bury me in court the second the ink dried on his term sheet. He truly believed he was walking into a coronation. I closed my laptop and slid the encrypted flash drive into my pocket. It is time, I told Jasmine. Let's go help my husband close his deal. We left Jasmine's office and took a private black car to the towering glass skyscraper that housed Chicago's most elite venture capital firm. The ride was silent. I did not need to review my notes. I had memorized every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, and every offshore wire transfer. We walked into the expansive marble-floored lobby of the firm. A security guard checked our credentials, noting my status as a verified independent contractor for the firm's compliance division, and escorted us to a private elevator reserved exclusively for executives. We were guided into a small, dimly lit compliance observation room. A massive two-way mirror spanned the length of the wall, looking directly into the primary boardroom. The audio feed from the boardroom was piped perfectly through a set of overhead speakers. I set my laptop on the desk and connected my encrypted flash drive to the firm's secure intranet, syncing my presentation with the projector system in the main room. I could see the 5 senior partners already seated around the polished mahogany table. They were financial titans who managed billions of dollars in assets. They sat with rigid, calculating posture, reviewing the printed copies of my forensic audit that Jasmine had securely delivered to them earlier that morning. 10 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. Derek walked in. He looked like a man who had already conquered the world. He was wearing a brand new, impeccably tailored charcoal suit, no doubt purchased on the very last drops of cash he could scrape together from his gullible fraternity brother. His hair was slicked back and he carried a sleek leather portfolio. He practically oozed a toxic manufactured confidence. He believed he was the smartest person in the entire building. He had absolutely no idea that the 5 men sitting around the table were looking at him not as a future business partner, but as a massive walking liability. Derek walked around the table, extending his hand to each of the 5 partners. He offered firm handshakes, making intense eye contact, deploying all the classic psychological tricks he had read about in cheap sales manuals. The partners accepted the handshakes with polite, stoic expressions. They had seen every type of corporate grifter, and thanks to my airtight report, they knew exactly what Derek was trying to pull. They were simply letting him dig his own grave. Derek walked to the front of the room and connected his tablet to the massive presentation screen. The room dimmed slightly as his title slide illuminated the space. It was a beautiful, professionally designed pitch deck. I had to give him credit for his aesthetic choices. But aesthetics cannot hide federal wire fraud. Thank you all for your time today. Derek began, his voice smooth and commanding. We are standing on the precipice of a massive digital revolution. My company is not just adapting to the market. We are actively rewriting the rules of engagement. Over the next 20 minutes, I will show you exactly how your $5 million investment will yield an unprecedented return. He clicked to the next slide. A massive upward trending graph appeared. It was a complete work of fiction. I watched through the two-way glass as Derek walked the partners through his fabricated user acquisition metrics. He spoke with such passionate conviction that a lesser investor might have bought the illusion instantly. He moved seamlessly from revenue projections to operating costs, throwing around buzzwords like synergy, market disruption, and paradigm shift. He glossed over the massive discrepancies in his operating budget with practiced ease. Then he reached the slide detailing his external marketing expenditures. To maintain our aggressive growth, Derek explained, Pointing a laser pointer at a brightly colored pie chart, we have partnered with a premier media consulting firm out of Nevada. They have been instrumental in driving our brand visibility. We have allocated a significant portion of our initial seed capital to ensure they can continue executing our global marketing strategy. I scoffed quietly in the observation room. He was literally standing in front of 5 billionaires, pitching them a plan to funnel their money directly to Vanessa's illegal gambling syndicate in the Cayman Islands. He was framing a massive mafia debt payoff as a strategic marketing investment. The sheer blinding arrogance of his presentation was almost impressive. Derek clicked to his final slide, which displayed the $5 million funding request. He smiled broadly, placing his hands flat on the mahogany table, leaning forward to project absolute authority. "And that, gentleman, is why partnering with us is the most lucrative decision you will make this quarter," Derek concluded, flashing his trademark brilliant smile. "I have the finalized term sheets ready for your signatures. Once we execute the transfer, we can begin the next phase of our expansion immediately." The boardroom was dead silent. The 5 partners did not move to open their portfolios. They did not reach for their luxury pens. They simply stared at him. The lead partner, a formidable man with sharp features and a tailored navy suit, leaned back in his leather chair. He folded his hands together, resting them on the table. He looked at Derek with the cold, detached expression of an apex predator observing a trap snapping shut. "That was a very compelling presentation," Derek, the lead partner, said, his voice entirely devoid of enthusiasm. "Your growth projections are certainly aggressive. However, we have a strict internal compliance protocol before we authorize the release of any capital." Derek's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but his survival instincts kicked in and he quickly recovered. "Of course," he replied smoothly, adjusting his suit jacket. "I am happy to answer any questions you might have about our compliance metrics. We pride ourselves on total transparency." The lead partner did not smile. "Total transparency is exactly what we require," he stated coldly. "We have spent the morning reviewing the supplemental data provided to our firm. Before we sign a single document, our independent forensic auditor has a few questions about your expense reports. Specifically, the offshore routing numbers attached to your Nevada marketing consultant." Derek froze. The color instantly drained from his face. His hands, still resting on the table, twitched violently. "Offshore routing numbers," he stammered, the smooth salesman cadence completely vanishing from his voice, replaced by a high, thin note of raw panic. "I am not sure what you mean. Our marketing expenses are entirely domestic." The lead partner pressed a button on the intercom console in front of him. "We will let the auditor explain the discrepancies," the lead partner said, not breaking eye contact with Derek. "Please come in." In the observation room, Jasmine looked at me and nodded. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored power suit. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the icy calm settle completely over my mind. I was no longer a betrayed wife. I was the executioner. I opened the door of the observation room and walked down the short carpeted hallway toward the back entrance of the main boardroom. I reached out and grasped the heavy brass handle. I pushed the door open, stepping confidently into the bright light of the executive suite. The sound of the hinges turning echoed loudly through the silent boardroom. Derek, desperate to maintain his crumbling facade and charm his way out of the sudden compliance check, turned around with a charismatic, welcoming smile plastered across his face. He was fully prepared to shake hands with whoever walked through that door and lie to their face. He turned and looked directly at me. His charismatic smile instantly died on his face. His charismatic smile instantly died on his face. The silence inside the glass-walled boardroom became absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating kind of quiet that sucked the oxygen straight out of Derek's lungs. I stepped fully into the room, letting the heavy oak door click shut behind me. I did not look like the woman who baked lemon tarts in his suburban kitchen. I wore a tailored charcoal gray power suit with sharp lines that projected nothing but authority. My hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek twist. I carried a single leather portfolio and my encrypted tablet. I did not look at him with the hurt, betrayed eyes of a wife discovering infidelity. I looked at him with the cold, assessing stare of an executioner stepping up to the block. Derek physically staggered back a half step. His eyes darted wildly between me, the closed door, and the 5 venture capitalists sitting around the mahogany table. His brain was visibly short-circuiting. The two entirely separate worlds he had built, his fake billionaire facade and the domestic life he had plundered, had just violently collided in the middle of a high-security financial firm. The color drained completely from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and pale under the harsh fluorescent lights of the executive suite. Hannah. Derek hissed, his voice dropping to a frantic, breathy whisper. What are you doing here? How did you get past the security desk? I did not answer him. I did not even blink. I walked right past him as if he were nothing more than a minor architectural obstruction in the room. I moved directly to the head of the conference table, placing my leather portfolio down with a firm, deliberate thud. Derek spun around to face the investors, his survival instincts honed by years of manipulating people and talking his way out of missed deadlines kicked into overdrive. He forced a strained synthetic laugh that echoed awkwardly off the glass walls. He desperately tried to reclaim the narrative, treating my arrival like a minor, embarrassing administrative error that he could simply charm his way through. I am so incredibly sorry, gentlemen, Derek stammered, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. His palms were visibly sweating. There must have been a severe security breach at your front desk. I will have my legal team look into this unauthorized entry immediately. Please excuse this interruption. The 5 partners did not move. They did not chuckle politely. They sat in perfect stillness, their hands folded over their identical leather portfolios, watching him drown. They were seasoned financial titans who managed billions of dollars in assets. They smelled blood in the water, and they were observing his panic with clinical, terrifying detachment. Derek stepped toward me, lowering his voice, trying to project the image of a concerned, long-suffering spouse dealing with a tragic domestic issue. Hannah, please, he muttered, stepping close enough that I could smell the sharp, nervous sweat masking his expensive cologne. You are embarrassing yourself in front of very important people. I know you are upset about the divorce, but you cannot just stalk me into a private corporate building. We will talk about this at home. You need to leave right now before I call the police and have you forcibly removed. I ignored his desperate whispering. I pulled my encrypted tablet from the portfolio and connected it to the secondary input cable on the center console of the table. The massive projector screen behind Derek flickered. His fabricated, brightly colored growth chart vanished. In its place, the stark, sterile logo of my independent forensic auditing firm illuminated the wall in crisp, high-definition black and white. Derek saw the screen change out of the corner of his eye. Pure, unadulterated panic flared in his expression. The reality that I was not just a scorned wife looking for an argument was finally penetrating his thick skull. I had digital access to the room. I had a presentation prepared. He turned back to the investors, his voice rising in pitch as he deployed the exact same sociopathic smear campaign he had posted on social media earlier that week. He needed them to view me as unhinged. He needed to completely invalidate whatever financial data I was about to project. Gentlemen, this is my estranged wife, Derek said, pointing a shaking finger at me. He manufactured a look of deep, tragic sorrow, shaking his head slowly for dramatic effect. She is clearly having an episode. She has been experiencing a severe, undocumented mental health crisis for weeks. She froze my personal bank accounts last night. She even took our son and hid him from me out of pure, baseless paranoia. I sincerely apologize that her instability has spilled over into this professional environment. He took a step toward the boardroom phone console resting in the center of the table, presumably to call the security desk himself. I need to have her escorted out for her own safety and the security of this firm. He continued, his voice dripping with fake, sickening empathy. She is not well. She does not know what she is doing. I beg you to disregard this outburst. I remained perfectly still, resting my hands on the edge of the mahogany table. I looked directly at Bradley Pierce, the lead partner of the venture capital firm. Bradley was a formidable man with sharp features and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in corporate acquisitions. I gave him a slight confirming nod. The trap was fully set. The bait had been swallowed whole. Derek reached for the phone console, his hand trembling so badly he could barely grasp the plastic receiver. He was 1 second away from demanding security remove the crazy woman who was trying to ruin his life. Bradley Pierce leaned forward in his plush leather executive chair. He did not raise his voice, but the absolute crushing authority in his tone froze Derek dead in his tracks. "Sit down, Derek," the lead partner stated coldly, his eyes narrowing into a glare of pure corporate menace. Derek paused, his hand hovering uselessly over the phone. He looked at Bradley with profound, desperate confusion. "Bradley, I assure you she is completely unstable. She has no business being in this building. She is trying to sabotage my career because our marriage fell apart." Bradley Pierce did not break eye contact with Derek. He gestured toward me with a sharp, respectful nod. "Ms. Hannah is the top forensic contractor for our firm," Bradley said, delivering the fatal blow with merciless precision. "We asked her here to verify your numbers." Derek slowly lowered his trembling hand from the phone console. The heavy plastic receiver slipped from his slick fingers and clattered loudly against the polished mahogany table. All the color had drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His jaw hung slightly open as his brain desperately tried to process the impossible reality unfolding in front of him. The invincible tech founder, the arrogant manipulator who thought he could outsmart everyone, was completely paralyzed. "Thank you, Bradley," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the expansive boardroom. "I appreciate the firm bringing me in to conduct this independent risk assessment." I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not look at Derek with any hint of betrayal or marital sorrow. I treated him exactly like what he was to me now, a hostile corporate liability. I tapped the spacebar on my laptop. The projector above us hummed, and the massive screen dominating the back wall shifted from my firm's logo to the first slide of my forensic audit. "Let us begin with the primary operating accounts," I stated, turning my attention to the 5 senior partners. "The pitch deck you were provided this morning claimed a 200% quarter-over-quarter user growth, backed by an alleged $300,000 in recurring monthly revenue. That data is entirely fabricated." I clicked to the next slide. A stark side-by-side comparison appeared on the screen. On the left was Derek's colorful upward trending fantasy graph. On the right was the raw, unfiltered data I had extracted directly from his secure cloud drive. "As you can see on the right," I explained calmly, "the actual recurring revenue is zero. The operating capital used to lease the office space and host investor dinners over the past 90 days was not generated by software sales. It was sustained entirely by maxing out secondary credit lines tied to a primary guarantor who was completely unaware of the debt accumulation. As of yesterday evening, those credit lines have been permanently frozen due to reported fraud. The company currently has zero operational liquidity." Derek gripped the edge of the conference table, his knuckles turning white. "Those are projections," he gasped, his voice cracking as he tried to defend his shattered illusion. "Gentlemen, startups run on projected valuations. She is deliberately misinterpreting standard growth forecasting to make me look bad." Bradley Pierce did not even look at him. "Be quiet," Derek Bradley commanded, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Let the auditor finish." I tapped the keyboard again. A high-resolution scan of a bank withdrawal slip materialized on the screen. The highlighted section zoomed in on a sloppy forged signature. To maintain the illusion of solvency after the credit lines were maxed out, the CEO resorted to direct theft. I continued methodically. "This document shows a $50,000 early withdrawal from a protected 529 college savings plan. The signature belonging to the joint account holder was forged. The funds were then moved into the startup's primary checking account to feign temporary cash flow." "This is a personal domestic matter," Derek shouted, desperation completely hijacking his vocal cords. He slammed his hand against the table. "This has absolutely nothing to do with corporate operations or this venture capital deal. You cannot bring family disputes into a professional boardroom. When a chief executive officer commits identity theft and wire fraud to artificially inflate his company's balance sheet, it becomes a severe compliance issue for any potential investor. I countered instantly, my voice dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. You are asking this firm for $5 million. Your willingness to commit federal financial crimes is highly relevant to their risk assessment. The five partners were entirely silent. They were furiously taking notes on their legal pads, their expressions hardening into masks of absolute disgust. They were witnessing a man's self-destruct in real time. I moved to the final, most devastating section of the presentation. I clicked the remote, bringing up a complex flowchart of wire transfers, offshore banking logos, and corporate registry documents. This brings us to the core of the financial liability, I said, pacing slowly alongside the projected image. The $50,000 stolen from the educational fund did not remain in the startup's accounts. It was immediately routed to a Nevada-based limited liability company, registered as a media consulting firm. I highlighted the registered agent name on the screen. It was the clever anagram of Vanessa's maiden name. This marketing firm does not exist, I explained. It is a shell company registered to the CEO's ex-wife. The $50,000 was pushed through this shell entity, broken into smaller transactions to evade federal reporting thresholds, and wired to a holding account in the Cayman Islands. The lead partner paused his writing and looked up, his sharp eyes locking onto the offshore routing details. Why the Cayman Islands? Bradley asked, his voice low and dangerous. Because that specific holding account is a known front for a highly organized, illegal sports betting and gambling syndicate operating out of the Midwest, I answered without missing a beat. The ex-wife is currently carrying a massive debt with this organization. I clicked to the final slide displaying the exact breakdown of how Derek planned to allocate the venture capital funds he was begging them for today. As you can see on slide 4, the CEO intends to divert $300,000 of your seed money to a non-existent marketing consultant to cover illegal gambling debts. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. I had just dismantled his entire life, his career, and his freedom in less than 5 minutes. Derek was sweating profusely. Large, dark patches of moisture bloomed under the arms of his expensive tailored suit. His chest heaved erratically as he began hyperventilating, struggling to pull air into his seizing lungs. The walls of the glass boardroom were closing in on him. He looked at the 5 investors, hoping to find a shred of mercy or understanding. Instead, they stared back at him with absolute, unadulterated disgust. He was not a visionary. He was a radioactive criminal liability. Unable to withstand their glaring judgment, Derek physically backed away from the mahogany table. He stumbled toward the back of the room, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He turned his head toward the frosted glass wall of the boardroom, looking out into the expansive marble-floored reception area of the venture capital firm. Through a clear, unfrosted gap in the architectural glass, Derek saw her. Vanessa was sitting on a plush white leather sofa in the main lobby. She had her legs crossed elegantly, wearing her stolen designer coat, scrolling idly through her smartphone. She was completely oblivious to the federal execution taking place just a few feet away. She was just sitting there, eagerly waiting for Derek to walk out those heavy oak doors and hand her the $300,000 bailout she had been promised. She was completely oblivious to the federal execution taking place just a few feet away. She was just sitting there, eagerly waiting for Derek to walk out those heavy oak doors and hand her the $300,000 bailout she had been promised. Bradley Pierce broke the heavy silence inside the boardroom. The sound of his deep, steady exhale commanded the attention of every person in the room. He reached across the polished mahogany table and picked up the thick, glossy folder containing the finalized $5 million term sheet. This was the document Derek had staked his entire fraudulent existence on, the golden ticket that was supposed to solve all of his problems. With a casual, dismissive flick of his wrist, Bradley tossed the folder aside. It sailed through the air and landed with a definitive heavy thud inside the metal wastebasket in the corner of the room. "This meeting is over," Bradley announced. His voice carried the absolute, unshakable finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. He stood up and calmly buttoned his tailored suit jacket. The 4 other senior partners immediately followed his lead, rising from their plush leather chairs in synchronized military precision. They began gathering their legal pads and gold pens, completely ignoring the man sweating profusely at the front of the room. Our legal team will be forwarding this presentation to the FBI for attempted wire fraud by the end of the hour, Bradley stated, looking directly at Derek, with eyes as cold as glacial ice. Do not ever attempt to contact this firm again. The hollow thud of the contract hitting the bottom of the trash can finally snapped Derek out of his paralyzed catatonic state. The grand illusion he had spent months building shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He was no longer a tech visionary on the brink of a massive industry disruption. He was a cornered rat facing a federal indictment. Derek lunged forward, nearly knocking over his own presentation stand in his frantic haste to block Bradley's path to the door. "Bradley, please, you have to listen to me," Derek pleaded. His voice cracked into a pathetic, high-pitched whine that echoed awkwardly off the glass walls. "I can explain the discrepancies. I can fix the ledger right now. I can restructure the equity parameters. The software is still viable. Just give me 24 hours to clean up the accounts. I just need a fraction of the seed capital." Bradley did not even break his stride. He stepped smoothly around Derek as if avoiding a foul-smelling puddle on the sidewalk. The other partners marched past him, their faces locked into masks of pure revulsion. They pushed open the heavy oak doors of the boardroom and strode out into the expansive marble-floored reception lobby of the venture capital firm. Derek completely lost whatever remaining shreds of dignity he possessed. He abandoned his expensive tablet, his leather portfolio, and his pride. He scrambled after the 5 billionaires, his dress shoes slipping slightly on the highly polished marble floor of the lobby. "Gentlemen, wait!" Derek shouted, chasing them past the reception desk. "I just need a bridge loan. I just need an advance to cover some operational liabilities. Just $500,000. Please, you cannot just walk away." The sudden commotion instantly shattered the quiet, refined atmosphere of the executive suite. The receptionist stopped typing and stared. Security guards stationed by the elevator stepped forward, raising their hands to intercept the frantic man chasing the firm's senior partners. Vanessa, who had been lounging comfortably on the white leather sofa in the center of the lobby, snapped her head up. The peaceful, arrogant smile she had been wearing vanished instantly. She saw the 5 wealthy investors storming toward the elevator bank, looking absolutely furious. And right behind them, she saw Derek. He was sweating, red-faced, and practically begging them for spare change in the middle of a corporate office. Vanessa did not care about Derek's public humiliation. She did not care about his shattered startup dreams or his destroyed ego. She only cared about the terrifying, violently ticking clock hovering over her own life. The loan sharks from the underground syndicate were not going to accept corporate excuses, and seeing the men with the money walking away sent a spike of pure, unfiltered terror straight into her nervous system. She leaped off the sofa, her designer heels clacking loudly and erratically against the marble floor. She ran directly toward Derek, intercepting him before he could reach the security guards blocking the elevators. She grabbed his arm violently, spinning him around to face her. "Did you get the money?" Vanessa shrieked, completely disregarding the fact that the entire corporate lobby was watching them. Her voice was shrill, echoing with absolute hysteria. "Derek, answer me right now. Did they sign the transfer?" "The debt collectors are calling my phone. They are waiting at my apartment building." Derek grabbed her shoulders, his eyes darting frantically around the room. He looked wildly at the venture capitalists, who were now safely behind the security guards, watching this unbelievable domestic train wreck unfold in their pristine reception area. "V, shut up!" Derek hissed, his face twisted in panic. "Not right now. Stop yelling and keep your voice down. We need to leave, too." I took my time packing up my equipment inside the boardroom. I closed my laptop with a soft, satisfying click and slipped my encrypted flash drive into the inner pocket of my jacket. I picked up a freshly printed physical copy of the forensic audit report I had brought with me. I smoothed the lapels of my charcoal suit, took a deep breath, and walked out of the boardroom with the calm, measured pace of a professional who had just flawlessly executed her job. I stepped into the lobby. Derek was still gripping Vanessa's shoulders, desperately trying to quiet her down, while she actively shoved him away, demanding to know where the wire transfer was. I walked straight up to them. The sound of my steady footsteps made them both freeze. Derek looked at me with absolute venomous hatred, but he was completely powerless. He had nothing left to fight with. I did not acknowledge his existence. I turned my attention entirely to Vanessa. She looked at me, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with confusion and mounting dread. She looked at the thick stack of papers in my hand. I raised my arm and pressed the thick stapled copy of the forensic audit report directly against her chest. She instinctively brought her hands up to grab it, clutching the evidence of her own ruin. "He has nothing." "Vanessa," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal certainty that cut effortlessly through the chaos of the lobby. "He is flat broke, and he is going to federal prison." Vanessa looked down at the thick stack of papers I had just pressed against her chest. Her eyes darted across the bold headers on the summary page. The words "fraudulent transfers, shell company liability," and "pending federal investigation" were printed in crisp black ink. She flipped frantically to the second page, then the third, her perfectly manicured fingernails tearing slightly at the edges of the paper. She saw the zeros. She saw the highlighted routing numbers tracing directly back to her illicit offshore accounts. She saw the absolute zero balance of Derek's operational liquidity displayed in undeniable audited charts. The illusion did not just crack, it shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of my eyes. Vanessa looked up from the audit report, her breathing shallow and ragged. She stared at Derek. A few minutes ago, she was looking at a wealthy venture capitalist who was going to erase her massive underworld debt and fly her to Paris. Now she was staring at a pathetic, desperate man who had nothing but a forged signature and an impending federal indictment. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. He was not a millionaire. He was a broke, evicted fraud who had used her as a prop in his own delusional fantasy. "You lied to me!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the high marble ceilings of the corporate lobby. "You said you were rich." Derek took a frantic step toward her, holding his hands out in a desperate, pathetic gesture of surrender. "V, please listen to me," he begged, his voice cracking under the weight of his total ruin. "The numbers are just complicated right now. I can still fix this. I know other investors. We can leave the city tonight. I can protect you. I just need a few days to move some assets around." "Protect me!" Vanessa screamed, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage and terror. "You cannot even pay for a breakfast at a bistro. You cannot even keep your own house. You used me. You told me you had millions of dollars in liquid capital, and you are literally bankrupt. The debt collectors are waiting at my apartment building right now. They are going to kill me, Derek, and you have absolutely nothing to give them." She shoved him backward. Derek stumbled, his expensive leather dress shoes slipping on the highly polished marble floor. He tried to reach out and grab her arm, desperately clinging to the only person left in his fabricated world, but Vanessa recoiled from his touch as if he were covered in acid. She realized with terrifying clarity that standing next to him was the most dangerous place she could possibly be. The loan sharks were coming, the federal agents were inevitably going to follow this audit trail, and Derek was dead weight. She had to cut him loose immediately to save her own skin. Vanessa spun around. Resting on the low-glass coffee table next to the white leather sofa was the large iced coffee she had been drinking while waiting for her payout. It was completely full heavy, with milk and syrup condensation dripping down the sides of the clear plastic cup. She snatched it up with lightning speed. She did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. With a swift, violent motion, Vanessa hurled the entire contents of the plastic cup directly into Derek's face. The dark, freezing liquid splashed violently against his skin. Ice cubes struck his forehead and cheekbones, clattering loudly onto the marble floor. The sticky, sweet coffee soaked instantly into the crisp white collar of his dress shirt and stained the lapels of the new tailored charcoal suit he had bought on borrowed money. The brown liquid dripped down his nose, ran over his lips, and pooled rapidly at his feet. "You are completely worthless," Vanessa spat, throwing the empty plastic cup hard against his chest. It bounced off him and rolled into the spreading puddle. She did not wait for his response. She did not look back to see the damage. Vanessa turned on her designer heels and sprinted toward the front of the enormous lobby. She shoved her way through the heavy glass revolving doors, pushing past a group of startled incoming corporate executives. She burst out onto the freezing Chicago sidewalk, fleeing into the chaotic afternoon traffic, abandoning the man she had used, manipulated, and ultimately discarded the second his pockets ran dry. Derek stood frozen in the center of the expansive lobby. The coffee continued to drip from his chin, staining the floor beneath him. He raised a trembling hand to his face, wiping away the dark liquid, but the stain remained deep in the fabric of his clothes. He looked at the revolving doors, watching the woman he had sacrificed his family, his finances, and his freedom for disappear completely into the crowd. He was entirely alone. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. The executives in the lobby had stopped walking. The receptionists had stopped typing. Everyone was watching the spectacular collapse of a man who had flown too close to the sun on wings made of stolen cash. His legs finally gave out. The sheer, crushing weight of his catastrophic failure overwhelmed his nervous system. Derek collapsed, dropping heavily to his knees, right in the middle of the wet, sticky puddle of iced coffee. The splash soaked immediately into the fabric of his trousers, ruining them completely. He stared blankly at the polished marble, his chest heaving, his mouth slightly open as he gasped for air. He had lost the suburban house. He had lost his son. He had lost the venture capital funding. He had lost his freedom. And now he had lost the very illusion that kept his narcissistic ego alive. I stood a few feet away, watching his complete destruction with absolute icy detachment. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel the need to offer a parting word of advice, a final victorious monologue, or a sympathetic pat on the back. My job was done. The audit was delivered. The liability was neutralized. He was no longer my husband. He was just a closed file. From the periphery of my vision, I saw the imposing figures of the building's security detail closing in. 3 large uniformed guards marched purposefully across the lobby, their heavy boots echoing sharply against the stone floor. They flanked Derek, who was still kneeling in the spilled coffee, completely unresponsive to his surroundings. "Sir," the lead guard commanded, placing a firm, unyielding hand on Derek's soaked shoulder. "You are trespassing on private corporate property. We are escorting you out of the building immediately." Derek did not fight them. He did not argue or attempt to deploy his charismatic charm. He simply let them pull him up by his ruined suit jacket, his head hanging low in absolute irreversible defeat. Would you like me to continue this story into the final part? I watched the security guards march Derek through the heavy glass revolving doors, his ruined suit absorbing the freezing Chicago air as he was unceremoniously dumped onto the sidewalk. I did not stay to watch him walk away. I simply turned around, exited through the private side doors, and stepped into the waiting black car with Jasmine. The execution was complete. 6 months later, the dust had entirely settled, leaving a vastly different landscape in its wake. I sat in Jasmine's corner office, the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the pristine mahogany desk. Jasmine slid a thick stack of legal documents toward me, placing a heavy gold pen on top of the crisp white paper. I picked up the pen and signed my name on the dotted line. It was the final decree of divorce. Derek had absolutely no leverage to fight the settlement. Jasmine had executed a campaign of ruthless scorched earth litigation. Through her brilliant legal maneuvering, we secured full, undivided physical and legal custody of Leo. Derek was granted 0 visitation rights, deemed a hostile and unstable presence by the family court judge. Furthermore, Jasmine did not just claw back the $50,000 Derek had stolen from Leo's college fund. She systematically dismantled his remaining legitimate assets, seizing his retirement accounts, and liquidating his vehicle to cover the early withdrawal tax penalties, my legal fees, and comprehensive emotional damages. Every single stolen penny was returned to my control. I handed the signed documents back to my sister-in-law. Jasmine reviewed the signature, closed the folder with a sharp, satisfying snap, and offered me a genuine, triumphant smile. The legal ties were officially severed. Derek was nothing more than a closed file in her cabinet. Of course, the family court was the least of Derek's problems. The venture capital firm had kept their promise. Their compliance officers handed my forensic audit directly over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Less than a week after the disastrous boardroom meeting, federal agents raided Derek's leased startup office. They seized his servers, his hard drives, and his fabricated ledgers. Derek was formally indicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud, identity theft, and attempted money laundering. Because he was entirely broke, he could not afford a high-powered defense attorney. He was currently sitting in a county holding facility, represented by an overworked public defender, awaiting a trial that carried a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 to 10 years in federal prison. The smooth-talking, arrogant tech visionary who thought he could outsmart a forensic accountant was now just an inmate number waiting for a plea deal he desperately could not afford to refuse. Vanessa's fate was equally poetic. The illegal gambling syndicate did not care about Derek's failed venture capital pitch, and they certainly did not care about her designer wardrobe. When the $300,000 bailout vanished into thin air, the loan sharks came collecting. To avoid severe physical consequences, Vanessa was forced to completely liquidate her life. She sold the $15,000 Hermes bag, her jewelry, and her luxury vehicle just to make the initial interest payments. She was ultimately forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, completely obliterating whatever financial standing she had left. The most satisfying piece of intelligence came from a mutual acquaintance just 2 weeks ago. Vanessa, the woman who had scoffed at my middle-class kitchen decor and mocked my domestic apron, had been spotted working the drive-through window at a regional fast food chain in the deep suburbs. She was wearing a highly flammable polyester uniform and a headset smelling like stale frying oil, handing paper bags of greasy cheeseburgers to local teenagers just to scrape together minimum wage to pay off her remaining underground debts. The limitless black card she had bragged about was gone forever. I left Jasmine's office and drove to my new home. I had not returned to the sprawling suburban house. Instead, my LLC had sold that property at a premium and reinvested the capital. I parked my car in the secure underground garage and took the private elevator straight to the top floor. The doors opened directly into my brand new penthouse apartment located in the heart of downtown Chicago. The space was breathtaking. It featured massive open-concept living areas, soaring ceilings, and panoramic glass walls that offered an unobstructed sweeping view of the city skyline. It was a fortress of safety, luxury, and absolute independence purchased entirely through my own financial brilliance. I walked into the massive state-of-the-art kitchen. Connor and Jasmine were already there, having arrived ahead of me to celebrate the finalized divorce. Connor was leaning against the marble island, laughing loudly at something Leo had just said. My 6-year-old son was sitting on a tall bar stool, happily eating a massive slice of deep-dish Chicago pizza, a smudge of tomato sauce on his cheek. He was safe, he was thriving, and his college fund was fully restored and growing. I poured myself a glass of expensive, full-bodied red wine. It was not purchased to impress anyone, and it was certainly not poured for a toxic ex-wife. It was poured purely for my own enjoyment. I smiled at my family, the real family who had stood beside me when the facade collapsed, and quietly slipped out the glass doors onto the expansive private balcony. The freezing Chicago wind whipped around me, but I did not feel the cold. I stood at the glass railing, looking out over the glittering, endless grid of city lights stretching out toward the dark expanse of Lake Michigan. The city was loud, chaotic, and moving at breakneck speed, but up here, high above the noise, everything was perfectly still. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, letting the rich, complex flavors settle on my tongue. I thought about Derek sitting in a holding cell. I thought about Vanessa working a drive-through window. And I thought about the incredible, untouchable life I had built from the ashes of their betrayal. They had tried to humiliate me, they had tried to steal from me, they had expected me to scream, to cry, and to beg for my place in a broken marriage. But I never raised my voice. I simply let the numbers do the talking. I looked out at the glowing skyline, savoring the absolute perfect peace of my hard-earned freedom. Silence and success truly are the ultimate revenge. The most profound lesson from this story is that true power doesn't require shouting. It requires strategy, boundaries, and profound self-respect. When faced with ultimate betrayal from those who should protect us, it is incredibly tempting to react with explosive anger or desperate pleas. However, the strongest response is often a cold, calculated retreat followed by unbreakable boundaries. By refusing to engage in toxic emotional warfare, you protect your peace and secure your future. Silence and success truly are the ultimate revenge. Take back your power today by setting firm boundaries with the toxic people in your life. Share how you've reclaimed your peace in the comments below.